The applause continued for several minutes as the guest of honor was honored that evening. This wasn't the first time Zach sat and listened to the minute-long applause for his wife, Cassie, but it was probably the longest. Some of Houston's wealthiest families showed up that night to support local charities, and for the second time in 5 years his wife was the guest of honor thanks to her work running the WOW Foundation of Houston. He was extremely proud of his wife, and she gave her usual polished and inspiring speech. Towards the end, when it was time to thank everyone who had contributed with their time and money this year, she looked at him, and he shook his head almost imperceptibly, so she smiled at him and thanked her family for being her rock and a source of strength and inspiration for leading the charity over the years. When the graceful woman finished, she received another warm ovation, which meant it was time for the small orchestra. The WOW Foundation has never had a shortage of musicians willing to perform. There was also a particularly good local vocalist performing in the evening. The entire time the speeches lasted, Gabriella, Cassie's mother, sat next to Zach and held his hand. Despite the fact that she was already approaching 70, she remained a stylish woman. Now standing, she leaned over and said quietly, "You really should let her thank you directly. You know that's why she always looks at you like that." He answered his wonderful mother-in-law, "Mom, if anyone can break my resistance, it's you. But we've already discussed this. I wouldn't be sitting here if it weren't for her and you. I will always be grateful to her and to you." She squeezed his hand and said, "Yes, that may be true, but I would say that you have contributed more than your fair share to our family. She wouldn't be standing there, and the foundation wouldn't exist without you. I could not have a better son-in-law, and I could not love you more, even if you were my own son." Let's agree that she and I had really good mentors in our parents. "You can be quite stubborn, Zachariah Davis." He laughed and said, "Well, I guess I learned that mostly from your late husband. I know, and I love you even more for it. God took him too soon, but if quality of life is more important than quantity, then he had some very, very good years." "Yes, and he told me it was thanks to you." Gabriella tried to hold back her tears as she kissed Zach on the cheek. She missed her husband, but at least she was healthy and had a wonderful family to love and who loved her. Zach missed him too. He probably wouldn't be married to Cassie or enjoying what he has if it weren't for Sam and Gabriella Ortiz. 25 or so years ago. As usual, Zach was late. Another emergency trip threatened to force him to miss the symphony concert that evening. He asked Mary, his girlfriend of the last 4 months, to meet him there. He promised her that she would definitely enjoy the evening and that they would have wonderful places. Zach picked up his tickets at the theater ticket booth 5 minutes before the show started, but his date was nowhere to be seen. 5 minutes after the start of the concert, she was still not there. Crap. He waited outside in the cool February air and called her, but she didn't answer. A few minutes later, he received a message. "I won't come. I can't rely on you. We're done." He sighed. 4 months down the drain. He couldn't blame her. It was his job. He was a highly trained MRI engineer and only came out when a serious problem was discovered during routine maintenance or, God forbid, something broke. Unfortunately, these trips were often unpredictable, which meant he had to cancel many appointments at the last minute and even missed her recent birthday. Another sigh. He was looking forward to this evening and decided to go inside and try to enjoy the performance. Quickly and quietly, he made his way to the very center of the hall, about the 10th row from the stage. Almost as soon as he sat down, he thought, "Marry who?" because sitting next to him was a stunningly beautiful young woman, accompanied by her pretty friend. They both seemed to be his age, late 20s. Since the performance had already begun, Zach nodded to them in greeting, and they both returned him with a polite smile. Today's performance was a collection of Mozart's works with several violin concertos. During intermission, Zach asked the ladies, "Good evening, may I get you something to drink?" The pretty one replied, "No, thank you. Perhaps later." This brought a smile from the beauty, who said, "Mindy, I'm sure he has plans for after, but it was a nice offer. Thank you." Zach laughed. Well, as you can see, there's an empty seat next to me, so it looks like I got promoted, which means I have no plans after this. It's a shame because I had reservations at Archero's across the street. I heard the food there is amazing. I'm Zach. If you don't have plans, would you like to join me after? At my expense. Without waiting for her friend, Mindy said, "Nice to meet you, Zach. I'm Mindy, and this is Lisa. I'd love to join. I've always wanted to eat there. Lisa, you can join or not, but I'm going." Zach liked Mindy's spirit, and she was cute, but he hoped they would both join so he could admire Lisa a little more. Mindy seemed to be enjoying the concert, while Lisa was much more cool and critical of the performance. They chatted a bit before the second part of the concert began. When the performance ended, the orchestra received a standing ovation, including Zach and Mindy, but Lisa still seemed unfazed. However, she then turned to Zach and said, "So, Archerio, huh? Let's go too." Zach was delighted. He did have reservations, but they were for two. After explaining the situation to the hostess, he gave her $50, and within minutes they were seated at a table. The ladies were impressed. Mindy asked, "So, Zach, although it was lucky for me that you were promoted, do you know why your companion didn't come?" "Yes, it's mostly my fault. My job is terrible in terms of scheduling. I can be sent to the other side of the country or out of the country at any time, which means I have had to cancel appointments with her several times because I had to go out of town. I know it wasn't fair to her. It's a shame because I asked the boss to get such good tickets. I wanted to compensate her with good seats and a nice dinner. Do you often go to the symphony?" Mindy responded, "Lisa goes to concerts a lot, but I haven't been for a long time. Since I'm her roommate, I'm usually terribly jealous." Zach looked at Lisa and saw that she was thinking for a moment. She said, "I have a degree in accounting, but I also studied to be a musician. I used to love acting, but now it's more of a hobby." Mindy snorted, "She's an amazing performer, but she's learning to criticize performances rather than participate in them. Now she hardly plays." Lisa turned to her friend and looked at her with not the most friendly eyes. Then she answered, "I'm learning to understand music better than I did before when I was just playing." Zach asked, "Oh, what instrument do you play?" Mindy responded, "She plays the violin amazingly. You should hear it." Lisa said, "I still play sometimes to keep up the skills, but I wasn't good enough. Not good enough to make it my profession." Then, turning to Mindy, she said, "And that's all I have to say about my acting." Zach realized that this was apparently a sore subject between them. They ordered food and enjoyed dinner. Zach learned that Lisa worked as a CPA at a local hospital near Rice University. Mindy was a Montessori teacher working with preschool-aged children, and her school was 10 minutes from Zach's work. She loved her job, but like many Montessori teachers, she didn't make much money. At the end of the evening, when Zach paid the bill, he said, "I know it's too bold of me, but I would like to see you again. If you don't mind leaving your phone number, I'll call you. If you want to think about it, here's my business card. As I already said, I often travel on business trips." Mindy didn't hesitate. "Give me your phone." When he handed her the phone, she dialed her number. She said, "I like to go out. I love both places like this and barbecue. I'm not demanding." He liked it. Lisa didn't seem ready to share her information, so Zach thanked them for a wonderful evening and wished them good night. Late Monday night, Sam Ortiz, owner and CEO of Magnolia City Diagnostic Instruments, and his wife Gabriella came knocking on Zach's door. They asked him, "Well, how did those tickets go? Did you and Mary have a good time?" Zach laughed and told them about how he got dumped, but he met two other women who he had dinner with. Sam was a great CEO and a good boss. Zach worked for him for almost 9 years, starting as an intern in college, and loved every minute of it. Sam was in his early 50s and his hair was starting to turn gray, and Gabriella's cooking skills meant he needed to lose a few pounds. His wife Gabriella was special, not in terms of beauty, but she was a force in her own right. She was the only woman Zach felt obligated to be respectful of because of the way she carried herself and acted. She was like a cross between a queen and the head of a girls' school, always correct, always impeccably dressed, never in trousers or jeans. Zach doubted she even had jeans. Most likely not. She exuded confidence without being arrogant. Although many on the team thought she was too strict, Zach considered her a rare gem, and she loved him too. Neither her face nor her figure would be considered above average attractiveness, but she was an expert in dress and makeup and knew how to highlight her assets. It was obvious that he and Sam were true partners in business and life. She once worked in the company's accounting department and continued to help prepare quarterly and annual reports. Her true value now was in helping Sam interview new employees, including Zach many years ago. She was also active in local philanthropy. They had 3 children, all around Zach's age. The eldest son had recently become a surgeon, the middle daughter was studying medicine and biomedical engineering, and the youngest son had just become an engineer at Ortiz. Apparently, the children were worthy people, like their parents. Sam said, "I'm sorry about what happened to Mary, but if you still have 2 new friends, that's something. I hope your next girlfriend will be more understanding. You know, I won't ask you to go on business trips forever, right?" "I know and thank you. To be honest, I like my job. Keeping these devices in working order is important to hospitals, their patients, and our company. So I'm ready to live the unpredictable life a little longer. Maybe in a few years we will find a way to reduce the number of business trips. Or better yet, hopefully we will grow so much that we can hire multiple engineers in each region so that international travel is kept to a minimum." Sam smiled. "That's the plan, Zach. This is the plan. Hopefully one of these 2 girls will be the right one." Sam always hoped that Zach would find a good girl. Gabriella didn't always approve of Zach's dating talk, her usual comment being for him to choose his girls wisely, which always made him and Sam laugh. The next day, Zach was very surprised to see a message from Lisa on his phone. "Hey Zach, call me when you have time." He called her early in the evening, and they agreed on a date for the coming weekend. When he came to pick up Lisa to take her to the restaurant, she looked gorgeous, dressed in a beautiful knee-length black dress with just enough cleavage to attract attention without being too revealing. Mindy was home and smiled sadly, wishing them a good time. Lisa told Zach, "Mindy and I talked and decided we'd try it as a couple first, because she's looking for someone who doesn't travel as much." Zach didn't complain because while Mindy was cute, Lisa was gorgeous. She had dark brown hair, but not her usual fair skin. About 5.5 feet tall, she was in shape with toned buttocks and breasts that looked little larger than the palm of her hand. He will be the envy of many that evening. Thus began a relationship that quickly flourished. A few weeks into their relationship, he persuaded her to meet his brother and sister-in-law, who also lived in Houston, at a restaurant near her work. Lisa went straight from work, and when she arrived at the restaurant, she saw a pretty woman talking to Zach at the bar. Enjoying what she found in Zach, Lisa didn't want anyone to come between them, so she walked up to him and said, "Hi, honey," and started kissing him as if examining his tonsils. The other woman's eyes widened at the sight, and Zach looked shocked as well. As she finished the kiss, she felt someone touch her shoulder and heard, "Hey, Lisa, I see you've already met my twin brother, Daniel, and this is his wife, Gina." Lisa stepped back, realizing what she had just done. She immediately put Zach between her and Gina and muttered, "Sorry, I don't know. I thought some stranger was trying to flirt with Zach." She then turned to Zach and said, "You didn't tell me you had a twin brother." "Sorry, I didn't expect you to do what you did." Daniel extended his hand and said, "Nice to meet you, Lisa." Gina wasn't happy, even if it was an honest misunderstanding. Trying to soften the situation, Lisa asked, "Gina, what do you do?" She replied, "When I'm not defending my husband from harassment, I work in procurement at Exxon." Daniel added, "I'm a criminal lawyer, and you?" Lisa told them about her job at the hospital, and after they sat down, they ended up laughing a little about what happened and having a great evening. Over the next few months, Lisa never reproached Zach for his business trips. When he was away, he called, and they talked on the phone for almost an hour. She was disappointed when he left, but happy to see him return. When he was gone for more than 2 or 3 days, she acted not just happy, but relieved that he was back. He liked that they missed him. Gina even introduced Mindy to her good friend from Exxon, Robert, who had quickly risen through the ranks from working in the oil fields to a management position, and they quickly hit it off. When Zach and Lisa discussed exclusivity, Zach asked, "Would it be a problem that I'm away so often?" Lisa laughed before answering, "Honey, you already told me that the longest you've been gone is 2 weeks, and usually it's 2 or 3 days. I think I can go 2 weeks without sex, especially when I meet you at home. Besides, I can work late or Mindy, and I can figure something out." A few months later, when Christmas arrived, they spent time with each other's families. Her family also lived in Houston and were a simple, prosperous family living in a good neighborhood. Her parents seemed to love Zach, which made everyone happy. At his parents' house, Lisa met Zach's older sister, Miriam, her husband, and their 2 young children, who lived in Austin. On Christmas Day, some distant relatives stopped by, and the holiday turned into a large Davis family celebration. Zach's uncle, Jack, brought a violin and played some music for his children. Soon, most of those present began to applaud in time with the music. During a break in the performance, Zach said, "Lisa, play us something." She smiled sadly at him and said, "Darling, you know I don't play anymore. I don't like it anymore. They don't want to hear me play," which, of course, immediately led to everyone asking for her to play. The look she gave Zach was pleading, but rarely hearing her play, he said, "Just one, please." Reluctantly, she accepted the violin, which was essentially the same violin, and played a few chords to get a feel for the instrument. Everyone's ears perked up immediately. Turning a couple of tuning pegs to tune it the way she wanted, she began playing Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, which had become very popular due to its inclusion in the Shrek movie and soundtrack, among other covers of the song. The entire audience was stunned and mesmerized by her skill and sincerity. She only played one verse, but when she finished, everyone just sat there in amazement until her uncle started applauding furiously. Then everyone began to applaud wildly, and Lisa blushed. Jack said, "God, Lisa, I'm scared to play after what you just did. It's like a completely different instrument." She whispered, "Thank you." Zach hugged her tightly, and a moment later his mom and dad did the same. His mother said, "Lisa, you should play more often. Anyone who can play like this has a gift that should be shared." "Thank you," she said, "but I think once I realized I wasn't good enough to play professionally, the disappointment killed a lot of the joy in the game." Zach's father said, "Lisa, whoever plays like that can play better than anyone except a tiny fraction of the population. You have to let people hear you, or at least for us, or at least for me. Anytime you want to play, I promise you that you will have at least one admiring listener." "Thank you, Mr. Davis. I will think about it." Seeing how well everyone got along with Lisa during the holidays, even Gina, Zach knew he was ready for the next step. As soon as their vacation together ended, Zach bought a very nice ring, and the next day at work, he asked Sam to meet him at the end of the day. When the workday came to an end, he knocked on Sam's door and was delighted to see his wife there. "Sam, Mrs. Rosie Ortiz, do you have a minute?" "Sure, Zach, come in. What's on your mind?" Instead of sitting across from Sam's desk, the three of them moved to a more comfortable couch and chairs around the coffee table. Zach loved watching Mrs. Ortiz. Just watching her sit was like poetry. Every movement had purpose and precision. Today, she was wearing a midi-length dress with a cape of the same length and 3-inch stilettos. Her scarf and jewelry complemented her sophistication. Zach said, "I'd like to show you something." He then took out a box with a ring from his jacket and handed it to Mrs. Ortiz, who instantly tensed even more than usual. Her momentary inspection of the ring was cursory. She handed it to her husband, who after a few seconds said, Very beautiful, Zach. Are you sure Lisa is the one? Zach smiled at them both and said, well, the woman I would most like to marry is already taken and sitting in this room, so Lisa is my next best choice. Briefly breaking the decorum, Gabriella laughed and stood up. Congratulations, Zachariah. She always called him and Sam by their full names. She continued, I'm happy for you. She turned and quickly left the room. Zach looked at Sam in confusion and asked, did I offend her with what I said? Should I go and apologize? No, Zach. It was a very nice compliment, and coming from you, it meant a lot to her. I promise. You know she thinks very highly of you. Then why do I feel like I did something wrong? She's just emotional. Do not worry about it. She's happy for you. We're both happy for you. Thank you, Sam. Your opinion and her opinion mean a lot to me. Well, you mean a lot to us. She always loved you from day one. Maybe that's why you and her get along so well. Not everyone understands it the way we do. Some understand, but most consider her too arrogant and arrogant. Zach snorted. These people probably prefer to look for future wives in nightclubs. Sam laughed. Maybe not that much, but I see your point. Tell me, what do you remember about the day you interviewed with us? You spoke to 3 managers, and at the end she and I spoke together. Zach replied, I remember being scared to death. I really wanted this internship, but there were 10 of us that day, and they told me there would be 10 more the next day for only 3 spots. Sam interrupted. It was because the price of oil started to fall at that time, which meant that all the local oil companies were hiring fewer people. Many top specialists have interviewed with us when they normally wouldn't. As you know, we hired 4 interns that year. Zach said, I know, and I've competed against the best. I remember that Mrs. Ortiz didn't ask a single question or say a word during the interview. She just sat next to you and took notes. At first, I thought she was your assistant. During lunch, all the candidates stood at the table waiting to be seated, and she set out name cards to designate who would sit where. You and the managers were at one end of the table and Mrs. Ortiz was at the other, and she sat me down next to her. Other candidates tried to get your attention. I assumed that if I was seated far away from you, I had no chance of getting one of the seats, so I focused on having a good conversation with her. She was a little cold at first, but after a while we were enjoying our time together, and I completely forgot about you. Sam replied, I can assure you, I'd rather be on your end of the table. Zach said, when we finished, she thanked me for a nice lunch and said she hoped to see me in the office. I thanked her for lunch and the interview, shook hands with you and the managers and left, knowing that there was no chance of me getting one of the places. Now, 9 years later, can you tell me what happened then? I'm still not sure. Sam said, she chose these places herself. The other 3 managers assessed skills and competence. She and I assessed how well the new employee would fit into the company. Everyone we interviewed was qualified enough to hire, and I didn't care about extra points on their evaluations. When you walked out of our interview, Gabby said, hire him, and we did. You didn't have to fight for attention during lunch. You've already been accepted. Of course, you could ruin everything by sitting next to her, but you charmed her even more. I still remember what we had for dinner that weekend, thanks to you, Manicotti. She told me how you helped your ex-girlfriend's parents in the kitchen. She was impressed by your suggestion of using a baking sleeve to fill the manicotti tubes and couldn't wait to try it. So that's what she did that weekend. On the way back home, she was still laughing about how you and one of your ex-girlfriend's father liked to roll around in the mud for a few months after you broke up. I laughed when she told me that breaking up was harder for you and him than it was for you and her. My main memory of that day was watching her laugh and interact with you. You know her now, and you know that this is unusual for her. I'm telling you all this because I want you to understand how much she cares about you. You have a special relationship with her. Zach asked, how did you 2 meet before she became Mrs. Gabriella Ortiz? Sam chuckled. I don't know about Mrs. Ortiz, but when we met, she was just a girl, or rather a young woman with an emphasis on lady. Like my parents, her family didn't have much when she was little, but they taught her manners and to always do the right thing. We met at a local food bank when we were in college. She volunteered there 2 Sundays a month because, like me, she had no money. My parents' church encouraged some of us to go there, and I ran into it, literally. I won't say that it was love at first sight, but as now, she had a presence that has only intensified since then. I may be responsible for running the company, but there is not a single important decision in my life that we did not discuss together before making it. She truly is my partner, and I am a better person because of her. Sam continued, "Don't worry about her. I promise you that she wants you to be happy. This is what she wants for you." "Thank you, Sam. I appreciate it. Please tell her that I hope I didn't offend her. I value our relationship." "I know what you value. Now." Sam stood up and Zach followed suit. "Let me know as soon as Lisa sets a date so we can book a vacation for your honeymoon." Sam patted him on the back and wished him a good evening. Zach considered waiting until Valentine's Day to propose to Lisa, but thought it was too cliched. Besides, he wanted to get married as soon as possible, so the longer he waited, the longer it would take until their wedding. The following weekend, he took her back to Archerio's, and in a secluded corner of the restaurant, he proposed to her, and she responded enthusiastically, yes. The wedding took place at the end of May, with a large number of family and friends. Her parents seemed very happy. Sam and Gabriella showed up, and Zach even had a couple of nice dances with Gabriella at the reception. Zach and Lisa headed to the Caribbean for a week-long honeymoon before returning to their happily ever after. Mindy and Robert became engaged and married soon after, and the two couples spent many weekends together. Sometimes Daniel and Gina would join in, and the weekends when Zach was in town were always good. At large Davis family gatherings, Mindy and Robert were also invited, and Lisa would sometimes agree to play, and they discovered that Mindy had a beautiful voice to accompany Lisa. The first 3 years were a wonderful time for Zach and Lisa, especially the time they spent together after he returned from deployments. 3 years after their anniversary, tectonic shifts began in their lives. The first push was associated with Lisa's promotion at the hospital. This was a promotion in position and salary. The company she worked for had hospitals all over Texas, and she said she would have to travel to Austin occasionally. Zach hoped that they could coordinate this with some of his trips that had become more predictable. The reason for the greater predictability was that Sam wanted Zach to oversee the production and testing of 2 new types of ultrasonic sensors. McDye designed them, and they were prototyped in Vienna and will be manufactured in Munich, Germany. The first sensor was a new design and was supposed to be more sensitive than existing sensors. With improvements in computer and graphics power, it was possible to produce 3-dimensional images of the body's soft tissues comparable to MRI, but at a fraction of the cost. The second sensor was much smaller and designed to be a portable device that works with the latest iPhones and tablets, intended for use in ambulances, field hospitals, and other remote locations. McDye was about to challenge the giants in this field. It was a big responsibility, but a great opportunity for Zach and company. The testing schedule made his calendar much more predictable. Sam also hired his daughter, Cassandra, or Cassie as many called her, into the company. She would do research and development, but no one knew what exactly she would do. The general consensus was that she and her younger brother would be groomed to lead the company in the future, which led to much skepticism among junior employees. The latest seismic event was Mindy and Robert's announcement that they were expecting a baby, and that Mindy was already 5 months pregnant. Her belly was just starting to show. Suddenly, this put a new emphasis on the schedule for Lisa, who was still saying she wanted kids, but wasn't ready yet, with the announcement of her being the best. Friends, Lisa began to doubt whether she was ready for this or not. She told Zach, "I really want kids, and soon, but if we both travel, I don't know. I don't want us to be away from the baby." Zach understood. He said, "I am with you. Let's see how your trips go. If my trips become less frequent, perhaps we can arrange this. Lisa loved the idea and shared her joy with Zach in bed that evening. A month later, Lisa made her first trip to Austin, while Zach had to go back to Germany for a week. They both had successful trips, and Lisa was more than happy to be relieved to meet her husband in the bedroom again. A few weeks later, Zach had another trip to Germany and several day trips around the S. 2 months after Lisa's promotion, Zach suddenly had to fly to Los Angeles to fix a broken MRI. As soon as he landed, he received a call from Daniel. Zach responded, "Hey brother, what's up?" Zach, I need you to do me a favor while you're there." "Certainly. What do you need?" Daniel said, "I need you to call me as soon as you start planning to come home." "What? Why? Are Lisa and Gina okay? Do you need me to come back right now?" "Calm down. No, nothing like that. There's something I want you to do for me before you come home. That's all." Zach said, "Okay, Daniel. I don't understand what the secret is. All the parts I need are already at the hospital, so I should be able to fix the MRI in less than 24 hours. Expect my call tomorrow." "Great, Zach. Thank you. I love you." I love you too." He thought, what the hell? Around noon the next day, Zach called his brother. "Hey, Daniel, I'm almost done and planning to take an overnight flight back. What do you need?" "Did you tell Lisa you were coming back?" "No, I called you first. What's the matter?" Daniel asked, "Can you call or text her and tell her you'll be there in a day or two? Then take the night flight anyway and come straight to my house. Gina and I need to talk to you." "Are you all right? With mother and father? Why such secrecy?" Afraid that his brother would start to panic, Daniel said, Everything is fine. You're asking too many questions. I need you to do this favor one time." "Fine." "Fine. My flight arrives at 5 a.m., so I should be with you before 6 a.m. We'll make coffee and breakfast for you." Zach replied, "Great." He wrote to Lisa, "I need to stay a day, maybe two. I will let you know. Sorry." Lisa replied, "Oh, that's a pity. I was so looking forward to your return. I'll go with Mindy and we'll do some shopping for the baby." He replied, "I'm glad it's not me. This baby won't want anything. Love you." Lisa replied, "I love you more." It was a good thing he only had to do the paperwork because Zach could barely concentrate for the rest of his time in the hospital. He took a taxi to the airport, collapsed into a chair in the waiting room, and took a quick nap, having barely slept the previous night working on the MRI. His 3-hour flight departed at midnight Western Time, arrived at 5 a.m., and he knocked on his brother's door a little before 6 a.m. Gina and Daniel were waiting for him. The children were still sleeping. Sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee in his hands, Daniel asked, "What time does Lisa usually come to work?" "A few minutes before 8's. Why?" "Don't worry, you'll see soon." "Daniel, you and Gina are so mysterious. Just say." "I need you to trust me, brother. Just one time, be a little patient. We all know how difficult this is for you." Zach picked at his breakfast but drank his coffee, and they were soon out in Daniel's car. As they drove, Zach asked, "Why aren't we going to Lisa and I's house?" "Quiet. We are almost there." "Daniel, what the hell is going on?" They turned onto a residential street in an older but upscale neighborhood with nice houses and large lots, about 10 minutes from the hospital where Lisa worked, near Rice University. "Shut up, Zach. Once in your life, just sit and watch. I need you to keep an eye on this house." He pointed to the house across the street and a little further. "And no matter what happens, keep your mouth shut and sit on your hands if you have to." Daniel locked the car doors. "Daniel, is this Lisa? Will I see her come out of some house? She's probably visiting a friend." Daniel replied, "I hope so. Read it." This was a recent entertaining article from an Austin newspaper. Zach looked at the newspaper and saw a photo of Lisa and a strange man, probably in his early 40s, on the sidewalk outside a theater or concert hall. The man was in a tuxedo, and Lisa was in a long evening dress. She was holding his right hand, and her engagement ring was clearly visible, but her wedding ring was missing. The caption read, Austin's Reginald Alderidge, a renowned music critic, and his longtime girlfriend Lisa Jennings attend the evening performance. Jennings is Lisa's maiden name. Daniel could see the confusion on his brother's face. He said, Miriam sent me this while you were in Germany and Lisa was in Austin. This article has information about it. Read it. All. The article is still available online and includes a photo of them kissing. I have a private investigator's report at home that contains more information than you would like to know. It's a novel, Zach. This is not a causal connection. Daniel watched as his brother became devastated. He could see that Zach was hoping for an innocent visit, but the truth was starting to sink in. Daniel headed back towards his house. Zach was reading an article that chronicled Reginald's career as a leading Texas music critic who wrote reviews for several Texas newspapers. It turned out that he was a music professor at Rice University, where Lisa studied, but would soon take a new position at the University of Texas at Austin, his hometown. The article was flattering and allowed him to explain many of his views and activities. Why is he so harsh in his reviews? He demanded perfection and expected the same from other spectators. What are his interests? He spent a lot of time restoring the old house he bought last year and loved cooking Italian food on the original stove. He spent a lot of time listening to the best music in his listening room. Personal life? He was very happy with his girlfriend and saw no reason to change anything. When they arrived at Daniel's house, Gina had already left, taking the children to preschool. She'll be back soon. Zach said, Let me call work before I look at the private investigator file. I won't be able to work today. He called his manager, Frank, and told him that he had serious family problems and needed a few days. His manager asked if everything was okay and where he was. He then told Zach to do whatever he needed to do and kept let him know. After the conversation ended, Zach began studying the folder. He said, Daniel, I can't believe you hired a private investigator for me. He must be really good to put it all together so quickly. We have several full-time detectives, and this one is really good. He owed me a favor, so he did everything quickly. Unfortunately, it was quite easy for him. If you were on a business trip, she usually spent the night with him. Don't you have a security system? If it tracks activity, I'm sure you won't see any activity when you're away. Zach collapsed in his chair, stunned by his own stupidity. I've never tested this. For what? I never suspected anything. I know, man. You were stunned. We all were. We all like her. Apart from her reluctance to play music, she looked just like one of us. Have you ever noticed anything? Nothing at all? Zach thought for a moment. Looking back, maybe the only unusual thing was that the longer I was gone, the more she seemed to miss me, almost as if she was worried. I thought it was just her missing me, but obviously she didn't since she had someone else. So I don't know what happened to that. Daniel just shook his head. The folder was very thorough. This was more general information than he had ever known about Lisa or about Reginald or Reggie. The information about Lisa was depressing. Lisa was the first violinist of the Houston Youth Orchestra until she went to college. She stopped playing around the same time she became Gerald's student. No explanation was given. The private investigator also had access to Reggie's house, and she appears to have set up a second residence at Reginald's with a collection of clothing and various items, so she rarely had to return home when Zach was out of town. She simply drove from work to Reginald's, opened the garage door, and drove in. All of Reggie's neighbors thought she was Reggie's roommate. It was known in the Houston music community that he had a long-term girlfriend, although the detective had not spoken to anyone who knew her by name. By this point, Gina had returned, and she and Daniel were trying to stay busy and out of the way while Zach continued his report. Reggie's background was not a pleasant one. An arrogant rich man from Austin has become the state's preeminent music critic. Two conductors left Texas, saying that Reggie had created an environment in which audiences criticized the music and performances too much instead of enjoying them, so the conductors moved to places where they were more appreciated. His scathing reviews were welcomed by local elites, but some performers also left because they were tired of the criticism and what was becoming an us versus them environment where performers felt hostility from a growing segment of the audience. The Pie Report featured a news article from a small newspaper in the Houston area. The lead singer, who was emotionally fragile due to her husband cheating on her and leaving her before her upcoming solo performance, was reported to have poured into her music and this one performance. Gerald's review was so harsh that she resigned from the symphony orchestra and refused to perform again. About a week after the review, she decided to commit suicide because, having lost her husband and music, she felt like she had nothing left to live for. Major Houston newspapers did not report the story. Daniel heard him say, "This man is poison." Additionally, there were a couple of high school reports from seniors accusing him of sexual misconduct that were buried by the school, and apparently Lisa wasn't his only girlfriend. The report contained detailed information about the inside of Reggie's house, floor plan, layout, photos of the interior with accompanying video. Photos and recordings of Reggie and Lisa having sex together were available on a personal cloud account, but Zach was advised not to look at them if he was going to win Lisa back. He had no such intention. After he finished going through all the information in the folder, he joined Daniel and Gina in the kitchen. After making himself a cup of coffee, the three of them prepared for their next conversation, which he was about to do when the doorbell rang. Daniel walked over to answer, and Zach heard, "Excuse me, is Zachariah here?" It was Mrs. Spagey Ortiz, and apparently she had a pair of jeans. When she saw Zach, she walked up to him, hugged him, and squeezed him. "Frank called Samuel, who called me. When I heard that you had problems in your family, and I knew that this did not concern your work family, I came as soon as I could." They all looked at her, speechless. She continued, "Come on, I'm not stupid. I know you, Zechariah. You have worked with us for almost 12 years, and until today, I think you have missed one day of work. For you to take more than one day off because of family problems is something serious." Zach smiled back. If he had never admitted it before that day, he definitely thought he loved this woman. He returned her hug. He asked, "Daniel and I are twins. How do you know that it wasn't me who opened the door?" "Because your brother looks at me differently than you do. You two could be dressed exactly the same, and I could always tell the difference." She then asked, "I'm guessing we're talking about Lisa." Zach nodded. "Is she cheating? You are sure?" Zach responded, "We have a Pie report. There is no doubt about it." She asked, "What are you going to do?" Daniel said, "We wanted to make sure he was there for us when he found out. Miriam, his sister, works at an investment bank in Austin. I saw the photo and sent it to us." Daniel turned to Zach and said, "After what happened with you and Scotty Mitchell, she didn't want you to be alone when you found out." Gabriella asked, "Who is Scotty Mitchell?" Gina replied, "I recently found out myself. It seems that when Zach and Daniel were playing high school football, the team's quarterback, Scotty, talked Daniel's longtime girlfriend into going out with him for a weekend during the season. Then he bragged and lied the following Monday during school to all the football players about having sex when they went outside. Daniel was crushed and Zach was furious that a teammate did this to one of them, not to mention Daniel. No one on the team was happy about it because they all hated Scotty. So the next day during practice, Zach, who was playing linebacker, got one of the offensive linemen to alert him when a certain play was called. When this play was called, the offensive lineman did not block Zach. Scotty was looking away from Zach and to the other side of the field as Zach ran past. Even though Scotty was wearing a red non-throwing jersey, Zach lowered his shoulder pad and slammed into the quarterback's non-throwing arm at full speed, breaking it. The coach was furious and kicked Zach off the team. Zach said, "It's been good for me. Instead of trying to play football for some small D Roman 3 school in the middle of nowhere, I focused on academics and college entrance exams and went to California State University. If it weren't for Scotty, I'd probably be in Richmond or Louisville or some other small town. Gabriella laughed. Remind me to send him a card for Christmas, which made everyone smile. Our sister Miriam was worried that if you did this to Scotty, what would you do to Gerald? Zach said, Mrs. Dries Ortiz, Daniel is right. This man is poison to society, and I am going to provide a cure. I appreciate you coming here, but you may not want to be a part of what I'm thinking about right now. She cut him off. Nonsense. Looks like you'll need a good alibi, and you already have a lawyer who can help everyone stay out of jail. You just need to be smart. For the second time that morning, everyone just looked at Gabriella, who said, I know everyone thinks I'm a pompous, arrogant queen, but no one touches my family. No one. Damn it. Watch your language, Zachary. Doing what's right doesn't give you the right to swear. Yes, madam. Gina giggled and Gabriella smiled. She liked Gina too. Zach also showed Gabriella a private investigator's dossier so she could get an idea of the situation. For an hour, they planned, came up with, and rejected every crazy idea they could imagine. Zach almost burst into tears when Gabriella said, we should just knock him out and strip him of his dignity quickly and easily. He had never seen her from this side and took great pleasure in it. Daniel let them continue until he finally said, each of these ideas will point to a jealous spouse, an investigation will begin, and Zach will probably end up in jail. It's time to get serious. Gina said, it's a shame the private investigator didn't say anything about the plane being sabotaged to make it look like an accident. This sparked an idea in Zach's mind, and he said, I have an idea. Mrs. Dries Ortiz, I need Sam to send me back to Germany. The four of them discussed the idea until they felt comfortable with it, or at least as comfortable as one could feel when perhaps facing jail time or the electric chair for what Zach was planning. Zach texted Lisa, I need to stay one more day. How was shopping for baby stuff with Mindy? Anything left in the stores for the other kids? Lisa replied, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Come back soon. Yes, we had fun. We left a few things for others. Her credit card was maxed out. Zach sent a message. I'll call you later. Lisa replied, I kiss you. When Zach showed everyone the correspondence, they all shook their heads. Gabriella said, you know, Zachary, she'll be amazed when all this happens. I bet she really loves you. Zach shrugged. Obviously not enough. I resent the fact that she was so sweet and loving on the phone when she spoke to me from his house while I was on the road. I don't want to be married to a man who can be like that. Deceptive, so convincingly deceitful while he lies to his husband. The others nodded in agreement. Zach continued, speaking of lying to her husband, later today I'm going to talk to her best friend Mindy, who covered for her. Gabriella stayed and had lunch with them because even though Zach was under Daniel and Gina's care, she wasn't ready to let him out of her sight. During lunch, she said, Zachary, you know you don't have to call me Mrs. Ortiz. The managers at the company call me Gabriella. I'm not sure I can do this, Mrs. Ortiz. For me, it would be like calling Queen Elizabeth of England or Pope Francis Jorge. I can promise you that I think about you much more than them. Half the time I greet you, I feel like I should bow and kiss your hand or do like some people in India who touch the feet of their elders, which I always thought was a nice gesture. Gabriella snorted, I appreciate that, Zachary, but I'm not anyone special. I'm just a woman who does the best for her family. Zach laughed. Sorry, Mrs. Ortiz, but I don't accept that. Saying you're just a woman is like calling Beethoven just a pianist or Michelangelo just an artist. If Daniel had a swimming pool, you could walk on the water without getting your feet wet. Sorry, you can ask others to call you by your name, but I just can't. It was obvious to everyone in the room how much he appreciated Gabriella, whose eyes filled with tears at his declaration of devotion. She smiled at the young man she had cared for so long, squeezed his hand, and replied, We'll work on it. Later that day, Zach drove a few minutes to Mindy's school, arriving before the time she usually left. It was an old building that had seen better days, but he had heard great things about the school, and Mindy said the parents were very pleased too. The office let him through and called Mindy so he could get up. His visit was unusual, but should not have raised any red flags that would have caused Mindy to contact Lisa before his arrival in her class. When he entered, they greeted each other with the usual hug. Zach kept the folder close at hand. Mindy said, "Zach, this is a pleasant surprise. What brings you here? I wanted to know how shopping for the baby is going, and if you need anything. How is Robert?" She laughed. "Oh, Robert is fine. He's enjoying late-night runs for ice cream and fried chicken. He's gained as much weight as I have. As far as the things we need, we've been fine for a while now." When Zach handed her his phone so she could see the text messages between him and Lisa from that morning, his smile was more of a grin as he replied, "That's the funny thing about lying for a long time. You start to forget what it's like." "Really? So you're not covering your tracks as well as you used to? Tell me, Mindy, is your credit card still smoking from last night?" Mindy looked like a deer in headlights at that moment. She could lie all she wanted, but Zach could tell from her appearance that she knew. I, I, I don't know what to say. There must be some kind of misunderstanding." He slid the newspaper article toward her, as well as a photo of Lisa and Gerald having sex. "Enough, Mindy. You've been her best friend since third grade. I know you know. Lisa used you to help cover for her for years. You know how many times I was away, and she said she did something to you? A lot. So what are you going to tell me? How long has this been going on and why?" "I'm sorry, Zach. Honestly, I can't tell you something I don't know." "Mindy, this is what's going to happen." Now his voice was becoming more angry. "Either you tell me everything you know about her and that creep, or I'll send this link with a video of Lisa and the creep having sex to Robert and tell him that you knew and helped her cover it up. Then you can explain to both of us what you know. I'm giving you a chance. Being so close to Lisa, you may not realize that men hate it when their wives cover for their girlfriends who cheat. It makes them think they're okay with it and would probably do it themselves. It's funny how it works. I wouldn't want you to either. Robert was fighting during what should have been one of the happiest times of your and your child's life." The fear returned to Mindy's face, and she said, "Please." I tried to get her to stop seeing him. "You have to believe me. I hate this man. He almost ruined her. I don't understand it either, so you have to help me by telling me everything you know." She told him everything she knew. She told him about Lisa's first meeting with Gerald and how she became attracted to the attractive professor who was an expert in music. He had to be an expert because he was an established professor and critic, right? He criticized her acting just like everyone else. He criticized her acting to such an extent that she stopped enjoying it. As a result, she had to leave him, but he was so smooth and elevated himself to such an extent that she and many others hung on his every word. Additionally, she was very attracted to him, and they became romantically involved. She said, "Zach, do you remember the night we met? The reason I was with her was because Gerald was at a concert in Dallas, and we used his tickets. I'm interested in you," and Lisa cooled down a little. "Remember, after we broke up, Lisa thought about your trips and decided that you were right for her because she could see both of you. Although I wasn't very attracted to the idea of traveling, I thought it would be. It is interesting to try you. That's why I was upset the night you had your first date with her. Lisa wanted to try first because then she could have both of you. I told her it wasn't a good idea. After you got engaged, I told her to stop, but she never listened. He didn't want kids, but she wanted to. She could have children with you and still see him sometimes. She led this double life, and I think it hurt her. He was the darkness, and you were the light in her life. That's why she was always like that. I was worried when you were away." He asked, "I don't understand. If that's the case, why does she stay with him?" "I don't know. My best guess is that I think she misses her music, and whether she admits it or not, he was the person who took it away. Now I think she remains with him, hoping that one day he'll bring back her music. Before she met him, playing the violin was her life. Or maybe it's some version of Stockholm Syndrome. That's the best I can think of. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, he lied. Please talk to her, Zach. She needs you. If she only has him, I will be very afraid for her. I'm not making any promises, except that I won't tell Robert until 2 months after the baby is born. That means, if everything goes according to plan, you have about 4 months to tell him, or I will. Zach, please don't make me do this. If her affair is about to end, there's no need for Robert to know. That's where you're wrong, Mindy. You shouldn't be hiding things like that from him anyway. Lies tend to add up over time. I'm not talking about the little secrets we all use to hide surprise parties or Christmas gifts or what something like that. Once you start lying and hiding the truth from your spouse, it becomes easier. If the deceived spouse ever finds out, he begins to wonder what else you were intentionally hiding. Robert doesn't deserve it. Zach continued, once this all comes out, he'll start asking you questions. I'm giving you a chance to get ahead of it. He'll be more inclined to forgive you if he hears it from you rather than someone else. Mindy started crying because she was starting to realize the situation she was in. The baby was due in 2 months. She didn't know how Robert would react. Zach said, "Of course, it goes without saying that you won't tell her about our conversation. If I find out that you did this, I will immediately tell Robert everything I know." Mindy nodded in understanding. She said, "Please give her a chance, Zach. She doesn't just want you in her life, she needs you." Zach chuckled at that comment, stood up, and turned to leave. "Remember, tell Robert, but be careful what you tell Lisa." Zach saw a frightened woman looking at him. Without saying another word, he left. He pretended to come back the next day, and, as usual, Lisa was happy to see him and stayed close to him all evening. There was no sex, but she slept with her arms around him, as she usually did the first night after he returned to their apartment. A couple of weeks later, he had to go to Germany again, and Lisa was sad to see him go. Early the next evening, about half an hour after sunset, Lisa was relaxing at Gerald's house when she received a text from Zach. "Surprise! Plans have changed. I'm in the immigration line at the airport. Do you want me to grab Chinese food on the way home?" Lisa replied, "Sounds great. I can't wait." She didn't need to rush, but she needed to get home. There wasn't even a kiss between her and her lover when she left. After she left, Gerald went to his music room on the top floor and began playing the music that was to be played at the next concert he was to criticize. The volume was set to simulate the sound of a live orchestra. Zach couldn't believe the neighbors didn't complain. In the dark, Zach easily entered the back door of the house using a copy of the key hidden in Lisa's purse. He walked quietly into the kitchen where, using a long tool purchased for this purpose, he quickly removed the wax and tape he had used to fix a hole that had appeared earlier in the week where an old gas pipe and an old stove connected. He heard gas begin to flow out of the hole. Now comes the tricky part. How far should one of Lisa's candles be placed from the stove? Too far away and Reggie might smell the gas before it ignites. Too close and the damage won't be enough. He tried to estimate the distance based on the information he was looking for, using the Wi-Fi at a local cafe on an old tablet that he later erased and threw away. He left Reggie's house and met up with his brother, who, being his twin, posed as him during the trip to Germany and back. After he got his phone back from his brother, he went for Chinese food. Now all he could do was return home, pretend to be sick and wait. Knowing what he had just done, he didn't have to pretend much. He really felt bad. Lisa was glad to see him again and was sincerely concerned about his illness. She put Chinese food in the refrigerator, warmed him up some chicken broth, and put him to bed. He barely slept all night because of what he did. The next day, he woke up at 5 a.m. and carefully scanned the local news online without typing in any specific queries. He saw an article about a gas explosion in a house in Gerald's neighborhood. The resident was rushed to a local hospital and admitted to the intensive care unit. Crap, this will complicate matters. Zach took a quick shower and left for work before Lisa was out of bed. Now what? Around mid-morning, he drove to the hospital where Gerald was taken, and it was the same hospital where Lisa worked. He saw an orderly smoker while sitting on a bench on the side of the hospital near the emergency department. Zach came up to him, sat down next to him, and said, "For $50 you can get information about the patient." The orderly replied, "No, but for 100 I can." "For 100, can you do it right now? I need to find out the medical information and prognosis for the guy who was brought here after the gas explosion." "Give me 15 minutes." The orderly stood up and entered the hospital. 15 minutes later, he returned. "The guy is in bad shape, but will probably survive. Concussion from the explosion damaged his eardrums, but he should regain most of his hearing. The spinal damage will require a lot of therapy before he can ever walk with a walker. Everything else is easy, a few fractures and cuts that they healed. The heat from the explosion burned him badly, but nothing worse than minor second-degree burns. They're keeping him under anesthesia for a few days to see if his spine stabilizes." "What does he mean to you?" "I'm a concerned neighbor." Zach then stood up, leaving $2.50 bills on the bench, and entered the hospital, finding Gerald's room number in the IQ and heading to the visitor area where he called his brother, who called Mindy for him. Mindy should have called Lisa and told her that she had just seen a news report about Gerald. Zach began to wait. Less than 10 minutes had passed when Zach saw someone running down the corridor. No need to guess who it was. He found a nurse, paid her $100 for the service, and followed her to the door of Gerald's room, from where his wife's sobs could be heard. There was something to sing about. Although she didn't know the full diagnosis, she could see that most of his body was covered in bandages, and his right arm and leg were in a cast. A neck splint was placed on his chin and chest to prevent his head from moving. The nurse entered the room, saw Lisa by the bed, and began to study Gerald's chart. She then walked to the other side of the bed so Lisa was looking at her instead of the door and asked, "Are you his wife?" Lisa shook her head. "Girlfriend?" Lisa nodded, not even realizing that she had validated the question by wearing her wedding ring. "How long have you been together?" Lisa nodded again. "About 10 years. "Wow, that's a long time. Does your husband know?" Lisa hid her left hand behind her back to hide her wedding ring. Then a voice came from behind her. "Now he knows." Lisa turned around in horror. She was shocked to see her husband standing there. The nurse quickly left the room, but not before saying, "If I hear one raised voice, I will kick you both out." They both nodded in agreement. She asked, "What are you doing here?" "I came to see if I could invite my wife to an early dinner. Your 10-year-old lover doesn't look too good." Lisa flinched at this remark, but said nothing. "What? The cat took away his tongue? At least you're smart enough not to try to deny it, which is what I expected. It didn't concern you." He chuckled. "You have no idea how much this hurt me. My whole world, our marriage, just fell apart, and you say it didn't hurt me. You should try harder." She said, "I never neglected you. You always came first. I just spent time with Gerald while you were away. And soon you'd be spending time with him in Austin while I was here. I bet you somehow arranged to spend more time in Austin now that he's moving there." The look on her face confirmed his guess, and she was surprised that he knew about it. He said, "Maybe I know more than you think. Think about it. What I really, really want to know is why. Did I treat you badly? No. Did our life suck? No. I was lazy in what ways? What about us or our lives? Again, no. Apparently, our marriage was simply not important enough for you. This is wrong." "Then explain why." "I don't know. I just couldn't let him go, and your absence made it easier." He said, "Well, I'm going to make it a lot easier for you. I don't know how much he wants you in his life, but I'm told he's going to need a lot of therapy. So he's going to need you or someone yet. I don't need or want you in my life anymore. so you can stay with him from now on. My lawyer will contact you." As he turned to leave, she grabbed his wrist and said, "Wait, I'll never see him again. Please, I really need you. Don't you understand? I still want and need you." "But I don't need you anymore, Lisa." She was hurt by this statement. He continued, "I thought we were a team. My mistake. Being married meant that we were together against the world, you and me together and no one else. If I had known there were three of us, me, you, and that bastard, I wouldn't have asked you to marry me. Stop. I wouldn't even date you. What a waste of 4 years." "It's not like that. We've had 4 wonderful years. You have to admit it. We can have more." "No, I can't. All this time I thought it was just us. I thought it was just the two of us making decisions about our lives together. I see he was involved too, looking at the trips to Austin. I can't have someone. That's just not how it works in our marriage. Maybe you'll find another fool who can." He looked at her hand and then back at her face. He growled, "Let go of my hand now." She begged, "Zach, please stay. We're not done." "Lisa, I've never laid my hand on a woman in my life, but if you don't let go of my hand right now, I swear to God I'll break all your fingers so badly that you'll never pick up a violin again, let alone to play it." She pulled her hand back as if she had just been burned. She never imagined that he could say something like that to her. Of course, she had never seen him so angry. Zach turned to leave, and again she begged, "Please stay, Zach. I love you." She heard him say, "Clearly not enough," as he walked out of the hospital room. Lisa collapsed on the nearest chair and cried. He hadn't planned this confrontation until the funeral a few days later, but now everything was mixed up. He returned to their apartment, took 2 large suitcases, and quickly packed them with the necessary things. On the way out of the apartment, he left his wedding ring in the middle of the empty kitchen table so that she would definitely see it. He would have stayed with his brother or his parents, but he didn't want Lisa to bother them even more than he expected. He chuckled. "Who's to say she'll miss me at all?" He could check into a hotel, but what next? He decided to call Miriam, and she told him to come over, which meant he was heading to Austin for a few days. On the way, he called Sam, who was at the meeting, and called him back later, which gave him a few minutes to think. Now what? He will call his lawyer and ask him to prepare documents for delivery the next day. He needed to call his family to let them know where he was. Maine. He wanted to really leave, like leaving Texas. Perhaps on vacation, although it's hard to enjoy anything when your heart is full of suffering. Speaking of suffering, if he was going on vacation, there was one thing he needed to do before leaving Houston for a while. When Sam called him back, they discussed the possibility of him leaving for a while, and Sam agreed to arrange it. He sent Mindy a text saying that he and Lisa had talked, and she might need to talk to Robert soon. Gabriella called and said he could stay with them. He thanked her for her generous offer, but refused. Surprisingly or not, Lisa called only the day after she was given her documents. He did not answer the phone. Her voice message said that she was sorry and begged him to come back and give her another chance. This will not happen. His sister's family did everything they could to lift his spirits, and sometimes he almost felt human instead of empty and burnt out inside. The time spent there was well used as it allowed him to understand his next steps. Fortunately, the Houston Fire Inspection Team determined that the explosion was caused by an old stove connected to an old gas pipe in an old house. The owner should have checked the pipe before starting repairs. A few days later, he returned to Houston to do one last thing before leaving. At the same time as the other day, he found the same orderly smoking on his break. $100 later, they made an agreement and Zach went inside. When he saw the orderly leave the room, he entered. Gerald was conscious. Zach stood at the foot of the bed so he could be seen. Zach asked, "Can you hear me, or do I need to write on this board?" He brought a small whiteboard with him in case he needed it. Gerald replied, "My ears are still ringing, but I can hear you." Zach asked, "Do you know who I am?" "I know." Zach pointedly turned off his phone and said, "I'm not recording this. It's between us. I'll take off my shirt to prove it if I have to." Gerald said, "It's not necessary. It's not a big deal." Zach said, "I won't take up much of your time. First of all, why? Why Lisa even after she got married?" Zach watched as Gerald tried to laugh, but saw him wince in pain. "Great. Why? You've got to be kidding. The why is simply because she's gorgeous and a great fucker, but you probably know that. If her marriage didn't bother her, it didn't bother me either." Zach had to muster all his strength not to break his neck with his bare hands. Zach asked, "Do you love her?" No. I care about her, but we don't mean anything to each other." "Indeed. Last question. Why did you take her music away? She plays great." Gerald said, "Of course she plays. She has real talent, but she relies too much on what others think about her music. If she's not willing to play, regardless of what others think, then she shouldn't play. At least those, whom I criticize, return to the stage and play." Lisa fell off her horse and did not get back on it. If she is so easily influenced by others, she should not be doing this. Zach was stunned. "But you know what this means to her, and you didn't encourage her." "Listen, I'm not encouraging anyone. If she wants to quit, that's her right. So, even though she could have been great, to you, she was just another lover." "Just another lover? Oh no. As you probably know, she was an amazing lover, and that's why I wanted to keep dating her." This scoundrel had the audacity to grin at Zach. But Zach had one last move when he said, "Enjoy life in a wheelchair, you bastard." Now it was Zach's turn to smirk as he walked out of the room. He got what he wanted. Entering the visitor's lounge, he sat down, and a few minutes later an orderly came in and handed him a small voice recorder. Zach checked that the conversation was recorded and left the hospital. He had dinner with Sam and Gabriella at their home. It was a very modest home, considering that they owned a successful business that employed nearly 200 mostly technical people. When they could have driven Mercedes, they drove Toyotas. They wanted to know how he was feeling. He said it was good that he was not in prison and that an alibi was not needed. Otherwise, he felt empty. Sam said, "Your brother and sister-in-law must love you very much for him to take the risk of impersonating you at immigration." Zach nodded. "They love. I'm lucky to have a family." He then looked at Gabriella and said, "Including both of you." They enjoyed their time together, but the mood was melancholy as Zach was leaving Houston, and no one knew for how long. Before leaving, he hugged Gabriella and said, "I love you, Mrs. Ortiz. Thank you both for everything." "I love you too, Zachary. Don't stay too long." As he left their house, Cassandra returned. They greeted each other warmly, as they sometimes bumped into each other at work. Her father was hugging her mother, and she could see her mother struggling to hold back her emotions as Zach left. Before leaving, Zach also received a call from Robert. Mindy told him everything. Robert apologized for Mindy's involvement and thanked Zach for insisting, or rather demanding, that Mindy tell him the truth. It will be difficult for them for a while, but they are determined to correct this mistake and improve their marriage. He spent his last night in Houston at his parents' house. Daniel, Gina, and their 2 children joined them. As they left that evening, Daniel said, "Zach, I know you need to go away for a while, and I understand that, but you have to come back, brother. It's going to be hard for all of us without you, so promise me you'll come back. Okay?" "I promise. I'll be back. I just need some time." Zach hugged them, and they left. The next day for Zach will begin with adventure. He was to take a position in Munich, Germany, where there was a company that would produce new converters. He will be able to be more involved in testing and improving the 2 converters as they are developed, as well as developing manufacturing capabilities. In addition, he will be the European MRI engineer and part-time salesperson for McDye. There was plenty of MRI service work throughout Europe, especially in Germany, where their concentration is high. Zach spent the first week at the hotel while he was looking for accommodation for short-term rentals. He found a nice two-room apartment near the city center, which allowed him to get lost in the evenings among the crowds of business people and tourists. It was mid-August, and there were a lot of tourists. After he settled, he took a few days to explore Munich and much of Bavaria. After a few weeks in his apartment, he began to wonder if he had made a mistake. He felt terribly alone. Sometimes he told himself that if he stayed in Houston or wherever, he would still feel lonely. Loneliness was accompanied by pain. He knew, or was told, that it would pass with time, but he wondered how people dealt with it until then. He video called his family from Houston, but it was difficult. They constantly encouraged him to go outside more. He did this sometimes, but never felt comfortable. Something was missing. The people at the tech center where the converter work was done were friendly enough to invite him to join them several times. There was even a cute girl who sometimes went with them, but he couldn't muster the courage to ask her out. Besides, with this level of indecisiveness, he didn't want to be a boring date partner. At least his German was improving. A little over 2 months later, when he arrived in Munich, Oktoberfest began. He tried to enjoy the festivals with his colleagues, but his heart was not in it. As luck would have it, his brother called him and told him that the divorce was finalized and his old apartment was empty. As stated in the divorce, everything was removed from the apartment, with the exception of her violin, which she left behind. Lisa did not resist the divorce and the proposed agreement. From time to time, Lisa would call and leave messages on Zach's voicemail saying she was sorry, but he never returned her calls. It appears that after 6 weeks in the hospital, Gerald was discharged and moved to Austin to begin teaching there. Due to his damaged hearing, he will never be able to criticize performances again. Lisa was also transferred to Austin to assist Gerald in his recovery. Hearing this news, Zach shook his head. So he simply existed for several months, waiting for the pain to subside. He hoped that one day he would feel well enough to end his self-imposed exile. Being in the center of Western Europe, he was close enough that whenever he wanted, he could drive or fly to various European cities on weekends to see the sights on his own. Instead of returning to Houston for Thanksgiving, he went to Barcelona. He discouraged his family from coming because of the possibility that he would be called in to repair the MRI. He did the same at Christmas. Instead of being hopeful, he found the thought of being with loved ones at Christmas unpleasant. Christmas in Munich was cold in every sense. His family, including Sam and Gabriella, called him on Christmas Day. Each woman was upset and worried when the calls ended. The men were also concerned, although silently. In January, as he approached the 5-month mark in Munich, he received a call from Sam. They usually reviewed progress on the new converter every 2 weeks, but Sam had other plans for this call. After the usual progress review, Sam began, "Zach, I want you to start looking for your replacement. It's time for you to go home. While I want you to continue to lead the production of the new product, I have other tasks for you here." "Sam, I'm not sure I'm ready to go home. Gabriella has been pushing me to get you back for months now, and I've put it off as long as I could. You have no choice anymore." Zach laughed. "I can imagine she can be quite a persuasive woman when she puts her mind to something." "Son, you have no idea. You've only seen a small part of what she's capable of. I swear, I think I spend half my time trying to keep her focused on the charity she's helping. Otherwise, she'd be meddling in her family's lives all the time. Children or company affairs. Sam, you wouldn't want it any other way." "You're right. I wouldn't want to. But she misses you. Seriously, you helped us grow in this region enough to hire someone there full-time. I want you to find a replacement. If you need more time to return, then come to her and to your parents. I'm sure they miss you too." "You sound like my brother. Great minds and all that. Why don't you try setting up some face-to-face interviews in a month, and I'll send Frank to help you conduct them and make the final hiring decision. If you want, I can talk to Demetrius and bring him in for the day." Demetrius was the CEO of a company that made the new sensors, where Zach was allowed to work when he wasn't going to repair Emrys or was working with them on a plan to produce new sensors. "I'll do it, Sam. I know you will. Take care, Zach. Zach worked with a local recruitment agency to help him test and select several candidates from across Europe. Then, using Skype, he and Frank conducted preliminary interviews with those with the highest test scores. McDye planned to bring 4 or 5 candidates from this group to Munich for final interviews. On Thursday morning, a week before the scheduled interviews, Zach was working in one of the offices of a manufacturing company in Munich when he felt a soft hand on his shoulder. "Hello, Zachariah." Zach was surprised to see a girl standing there. "Cassie, I didn't know you were coming. What brings you here?" "Well, I could tell you the official version is that I've been asked to ask you to take me to Vienna. I have meetings there with our R&D partner early next week, and then I'll be back here midweek. Of course, we both know that this is complete nonsense. Although my meetings are real, I could fly to Vienna and spend a cold but wonderful weekend there myself, even though we already have 2 rooms booked. If you can't, or if you don't want to come with me to Vienna, I can take the train, no problem. However, I'm told you're a travel expert and have spent some time in this region. If you want to spend what they say is a cold but wonderful 3-day weekend with someone who cares about you more than the people around here, then we should go together. They say this is one of the most beautiful capitals in Europe. If you refuse, I will completely understand, although I have no doubt that my mother will not understand this, and while I am abroad, I will forward all her calls to you. Remembering what Sam had said about interfering in his children's lives, Zach laughed. I'm guessing if I call Frank, he'll confirm that he or someone else is filling in for me today and tomorrow. He liked Cassie's smile as she said, "Well, it's 3,000 in the morning in Houston, so if you want to call your boss, go ahead. But I don't think he'll be too happy to hear from you." Zach said, "So I'll give you one chance to refuse before I agree. Are you sure you want to do this? I can handle your mother." Did I just say that? I had to say, I can survive the consequences. She replied, "I'm not sure you can handle it, but if I were completely against it, I wouldn't be here now. Do the girl a favor, okay? I know I'm not the most beautiful woman in the world, but it still hurts to be rejected." She made him laugh, and he thought it might be quite funny. She definitely wasn't her mother. "We need to come to my place so I can pack for the weekend. It will only take a few minutes. I can get you to Vienna in 4 hours if we're in a hurry, or we can take the scenic route and stop for lunch in a stunning location. It's up to you. I'm at your disposal for the weekend, so I'll let you show me a good holiday. Mom gave us her Amex to use this weekend, and I intend to make the most of it." "Then it's definitely a scenic route. Go." In the taxi on the way to his apartment, he asked, "Have you eaten anything? How do you deal with jet lag?" "I grabbed a bagel and coffee on the way from the airport, so the food was fine. Thanks to your jet lag tips that you shared with your department, I went to bed a little earlier each night last week and took melatonin at the appropriate time before my flight along with a mini bottle of tequila. I also took 2 packets of instant coffee to help me wake up on the plane, so everything seemed fine, although I was a little tired. Maybe I'll fall asleep in the car." "Oh, I doubt it. Snow in the mountains must be beautiful. I'm sure you've seen mountains before, but after Flat Houston, this ride through the mountains will keep your attention. At least it did for me." He rented a car at the company's expense and made a reservation in advance for a late lunch at a restaurant. She liked his apartment. It wasn't anything special, but it was obvious that he kept it clean even when he wasn't expecting guests. At that moment, only small compact cars or Mercedes E-Class were available at the car rental desk. They smiled at each other, put down Gabriella's Amex card, and chose a Mercedes. As Zach mentioned, instead of taking the direct route, they headed towards Salzburg, but bypassed it and went to Hallstatt, one of the most picturesque lakeside villages in Austria. Above the city and lake is the Rudelsturm restaurant with breathtaking views of the snow-covered city and lake from its covered terrace. Zach's German was improving, but he was amazed when Cassie began speaking incredibly good German to the waitress, which improved service over speaking English. They heard several visitors speaking English and several other languages. He said, "I didn't know you spoke German. There are probably a lot of things about me that you don't know. The two countries in the world leading the way in research on the technology we want to use are the United States and Germany. I studied in Aachen for 1 semester and had to work on my German then." He thought that was quite impressive, but he began to realize that she was quite an impressive person. Sitting next to Cassie and enjoying the view of the lake was not difficult. He always saw her well-dressed, and her light makeup was always an improvement. Today, she was dressed for the weather, a nice heavy skirt and tights with what looked like a pair of riding boots. Her dark cashmere sweater was very flattering. She looked a lot like her mother, although she was slimmer. She had small breasts and wide hips, and was in good physical shape. Unlike her mom, she wore her dark hair in loose, natural curls instead of pinned up like Gabriella. Instead of a sensual, sculpted face like Lisa's, her round face could be described as sweet and innocent, more like her mother's face. Like she said, she wasn't a stunning beauty, but he was married to a stunning beauty, and look where that got him. From a vantage point near the restaurant, they took a selfie with the city, lake, and snow-capped mountains in the background and sent it to her mother. Leaving the city, they took a more scenic and mountainous route to Vienna. He asked, "What will you do in Vienna?" She replied, "As I mentioned, I will be with our research and development partners. We are redesigning the transducer to be more sensitive than the current model you and our manufacturing partners are working on. You always have to work on the next model. Are you helping design the converter?" "Yes, but don't tell anyone. One of the reasons I studied in Germany was to research and get contacts of those who can help our company here. Only a few people in the company know about this." "But why keep it a secret? I thought you'd want everyone to know about it." "If everything goes well, then everyone will know. As things stand now, many already think that Dad is going to transfer the company to me and my brother. We're trying to stay more reserved until we build a reputation for ourselves. My little brother Tom, who you've known for a long time, is working on software to better visualize the images from each new transducer we test." "Wow, a family business, to be sure." She smiled because she knew something about him and the family business that he didn't know. She said, "Yes, family business. Dad would like it to stay that way." Zach laughed and said, "I might work for you one day." She laughed too because she thought it would probably be the other way around. "You may see it that way, but Dad doesn't think so. He doesn't think you're working for him now. He prefers to think that you and a few other very carefully selected people are working with him. Everyone else works for you all." "Wow. Don't be too surprised about me and the R&D team. I attended medical school and graduate school for almost 10 years. I started designing parts of the design myself while I was studying. I don't claim to be a super genius, but I am well educated. After 12 years of undergraduate and graduate school, including completion of medical school, I finally have my PhD. I'm betting that either my parents or my scholarships allowed me to spend over $500,000 on tuition. It was time to start putting this into practice." She clearly wasn't in the company just for show. They talked about the company, the industry, her biography, and education. They spent a lot of time talking about her mother, which was fun. Cassie admired her mother and loved her for who she was, but she was not her mother. She tried to adopt many of her mannerisms and grace, but her mother was much more reserved. Cassie was ready to call a spade a spade. Zach could tell she got it from Sam. Her mother might call it a garden tool or a shovel, depending on the delicacy of the situation. Up to this point, they had not discussed Zach's marriage or divorce. As they left the mountains and entered Vienna, she said, "You know, she misses you and is very worried about you." Zach chuckled. "Unfortunately, I have several women who miss and worry about me. My sister-in-law, my mother, and your mother. I assume you're talking about your mom." "Yes, exactly. I wish she wouldn't worry. I'm getting better. She would have come instead of me, but Mrs. Khan Property thought it would not look good. She is a married woman." They both laughed. "This looks so much like her." Now she has forced you to be a sacrificial lamb, or perhaps be your guide out of the labyrinth. Wow. He looked at her, and she was looking out the window, or maybe she was just turning away from him. Thank you, Cassie. The rest of the weekend could be a disaster, but I've already enjoyed more today than I have in months. It was absolutely true, but the conversation was getting too serious, so he said, "See, that in itself should prove to her that I'm getting better." Although he knew that today was just a pleasant distraction. In the reflection of the car window, he saw her smile. They stayed at the Park Hyatt Vienna, where they each had a deluxe park suite for the long weekend, 2 luxurious rooms. After they got settled, they met at the concierge desk and found a nice restaurant and bought 2 skip-the-line tickets for the giant Ferris wheel and booked a horse-drawn ride for the evening. The evening was cold but beautiful, and from the top of the Ferris wheel, they sent Gabriella another photo of the two of them with Winter Vienna in the background. Gabriella was delighted with the photos she received, and it took all her self-control not to call them. She was more pleased than she could have imagined, but knew better than to interfere now. After all the planning and scheming with Sam over the past couple of months, she decided to wait to see how things would work out. I hope Zach doesn't get any emergency calls for MRI repairs. She also needed to do charity work to take her mind off it, and she was able to do it, just barely. Zach and Cassie took advantage of a late evening carriage tour, snuggled together under a warm blanket with 2 large thermoses of rich hot chocolate to help them find some places they wanted to visit over the rest of the winter weekend. At the end of the evening, outside her hotel door, Zach received a hug, a kiss on the cheek, and a thank you for his efforts. On Saturday morning, after a sumptuous breakfast together in the hotel's beautiful restaurant, they planned their weekend with a concierge. She wanted to visit a couple of magnificent churches, as well as several palaces and markets. Zach said, "If you like cathedrals, there is one in Barcelona that I should show you." She smiled at him and replied, "Perhaps one day I will demand that promise from you." There were no mishaps with the MRI, and they enjoyed their weekend in Vienna. As predicted, it was quite cold, below zero during the day, but the skies were exceptionally clear. They visited many beautiful and interesting places this weekend, including Stephansdom, Kunsthistorisches Museum, Schönbrunn Palace, Belvedere Palace, Naschmarkt, and Café Central, to name a few. Every evening he received a hug and a kiss on the cheek for his efforts. Zach bought her a snow globe to commemorate their trip. On Sunday afternoon, when it was time for him to go back to Munich, she said, "I want to thank you, Zacharias. You didn't have to go, but I'm glad you went. I had a great time with you here." "Me too. I'll admit, I was hesitant at the start, and it was entirely my fault, but it was a great weekend. Thank you for inviting me." He hesitated to ask what he was thinking about, but decided to. "When did you say you would return to Munich?" "My train arrives on Wednesday afternoon." "Why?" she saw Zach thinking. "Could you be free on Friday to help with interviews?" "Zachary, I don't know much about Emrys, and we both know I'm not my mother. I don't see how I can be useful." "I know you're not your mother, but..." He tried to find a way to convince her to agree. She saw a smile spread across his face before he said, "You said it was a family business. I think it's important to at least hear your opinion about the candidates. I'll see what I can do." He hoped it would be a yes. During the week in Munich, Zach thought about Cassie often. He thought about her business lunches or dinners with the research and development company in Vienna and found himself a little jealous. Why? He had no idea. Still, it was a good weekend. This was exactly what he needed. On Wednesday afternoon, Zach met her at the train station. Cassie was pleasantly surprised. That evening, they had a business dinner with Demetrius and a couple of other people. After dinner, Zach walked Cassie to her hotel. She asked, "Zachary, do you remember the cathedral in Barcelona that you told me about?" "I remember. Do you have any plans for this weekend?" No, none." She asked, "I know this is last minute, but can I convince you to be my tour guide again for a short weekend in Barcelona?" Since he really enjoyed last weekend, he replied, I don't think it will be too hard for you to convince me of almost anything. She smiled at his answer. Fine. I will arrange tickets and a hotel. Good night, Zechariah. Again, she hugged him and kissed him on the cheek, but this time for longer. Good night, Cassie. He was starting to like these hugs and kisses. The interviews on Friday morning went well. They invited 4 final candidates and conducted interviews with Cassie and Zach. They then discussed it together and decided to offer the position to a man named Dominic, who was about Zach's age. They sent the other candidates home and took Dominic out to lunch. Everyone was chatting, mixing German and English, when Frank's cell phone rang. Zach heard his weekend with Cassie fall apart. He heard, "Okay, where? Give me the details." "Yes, I'll give them to Zach. He's sitting next to me now." Zach asked, "An emergency?" "There is one, in Belfast." Zach looked at Cassie with a sad smile, and she shrugged. He told her, "Family business." She nodded. "Family business." He turned to Dominic and asked, "I know you haven't had time to think about our offer, but how about you go on the call right now? You can see how we work and make a decision." Dominic agreed, and they prepared to go to the airport together. Zach and Cassie had only a few minutes left before he left. He said, "Sorry, I would really like to go to Barcelona with you." She replied, "It's okay. We will have other opportunities someday." He nodded, thinking that fate was trying to tell him something. The service call went well as usual, and Dominic, who lived in Frankfurt, agreed to join the company. In Belfast, Zach thought more about starting a relationship with Cassie. He liked the idea, but he was tormented by the thought that he needed to tell her what he had done to Gerald. He still felt that he had done the right thing and that Gerald, a disgusting man, deserved what happened to him. However, now he needed to tell Cassie about it. He didn't have to do this now, but he didn't want to hide anything from her. He cared too much about her, or at least about her as a member of the Ortiz family, to lead her by the nose. Although the past weekend had been such a pleasant distraction, he was now once again in a state of serious despondency. He began preparing to close up on his apartment and move back to Houston. A week had passed since Cassie's return when his phone rang. "Hello, Zachariah." "Hi, Cassie. How are things in Houston?" "Cool and humid, which is better than the usual hot and humid weather. I haven't heard from you. I just want to make sure you're okay." He decided that trying to explain why he tried to kill a man was not meant to be a telephone conversation, so he put it off until later when he returned to Houston. "Sorry, it's entirely my fault. I really wanted to call, but I've been depressed lately. I'll explain it the next time I see you." "About. Okay. Well, speaking of the next time I see you, have you already planned your return?" "Plans aren't finalized yet, but I should be home in less than a month." "Will I see you when you get back?" She felt she sounded desperate. "Hope so." He felt the same. They talked for about 30 minutes before they both had to go. Their little conversations continued every few days, although Zach found it harder and harder to engage in conversation. It all seemed so meaningless to him. Will his feelings prevent him from ever getting married? At the time, he truly believed that what he did to Gerald was justified. He still felt that way, but why was he now so worried that Cassie, or any other decent woman, wouldn't feel the same way? He thought that his internal arguments were the equivalent of a dog chasing its tail, pretty pointless until you either exhaust yourself or get hurt. Even though he was worried about what was going on between him and Cassie, he was glad to be back in Houston and see his family, including the Ortiz. On Friday, when he returned to Houston, everyone he cared about was waiting for him at the airport, including his sister and her family and Gabriella, but not Cassie. Big hugs for everyone, and they all had dinner at Zach and Daniel's parents' house. Gabriella loved watching Zach interact with his little nieces and nephews. At the end of the evening, he walked Gabriella to her car. The two of them were outside when he asked, "How's Cassie?" "I think she's confused and maybe a little annoyed. She's not sure where your head is right now. Do you know where your head is right now? No, not really. I keep coming back to that meeting we had after I found out about Lisa's betrayal and what I did after that. Gabriella said, "You mean what we did? You had help." You're right. I was, but I'm not going to keep any secrets from someone with whom I can have a serious relationship. I can very easily see myself being serious about Cassie. How can I have this conversation with her or anyone else? Can you imagine me saying, "Hey, I planned to kill a man. Turns out I didn't kill him, but he was crippled for life. He's a real bastard, so he deserved it. Do you still want to date or get married to me? See what I mean?" Gabriella still thought they had done the right thing, but she understood his concern. "Zachary, just talk to her. I think mitigating circumstances justify action, but you need to discuss this with her. After a while, I think she'll be fine." Zach replied, "She may or may not." She said, "It's true, maybe it won't, but you won't know until you try. I hope you try." I have a feeling this conversation will be harder than my last one with Lisa. Do not think so. Cassandra is a very mature young lady, but she can't read your mind. Make sure your actions speak volumes about your intentions. He sighed. "I don't know what my intentions are at the moment." She touched his face with her hand. "I understand that, but your decision to do nothing will still be perceived by others as a choice. Thank you, Mrs. Ortiz. Thank you for coming. Tell Sam I'll see him on Monday. I'll pass it on. What about Cassie? I'll call her." "Fine. Take care, young man." As he watched her drive away, he didn't feel very young. He tried to call Cassie the next day, but she didn't answer. He tried again the next day, but she still didn't respond. At the office on Monday, he waited until lunchtime to look into her office. Her door was open, and she was sitting at her desk when he knocked on the door frame. He saw the snow globe on her desk, which made him smile. He started, "Hello." Coldly, she replied, "Hello. How are you? What do you need, Zach?" Oh. Clearly, she was still annoyed. "I wanted to apologize. My condition hasn't been good since you left, and it's my fault, not yours." She said, "I really enjoyed our time together and was looking forward to going to Barcelona. If I understood the situation correctly, I thought you would too. And then you completely changed. Can you explain why?" "I can, but not now." "About? Well, until then, I don't think we have anything to talk about. Right now, I have things to finish." It really hurt her to tell him that, but she didn't want to get involved in a relationship with someone who couldn't understand his own feelings for her because it would lead to disappointment. Zach stood up to leave. "I really enjoyed our time together." She asked, "Could you close the door when you leave?" He closed. She didn't want anyone to see the tears in her eyes for the next few minutes. 2 months passed, and there was almost no communication between Zach and Cassie. Zach couldn't bring up what he did to Gerald because he knew that when he did, Cassie would probably reject him. On the other hand, until he discusses this with her, she still rejects him. Every time Gabriella looked at Zach, she felt a little sadder. It pained her to watch two people she loved so much build a wall between them before they had a chance. There were rumors in the office that Cassie was dating a doctor whom her older brother introduced her to. Zach began to wonder how much longer he could work at McDye. 1 year? 2? He was sad to think that he might have to leave the company where he had worked for 12 years, his entire professional life, which began in college. Did he want to continue putting his efforts into a company where he felt the future was becoming more and more untenable? Since Cassie and Tom would likely gain more responsibilities as time went on, he didn't think they would ever hold a grudge against him, but his time around Cassie lately had been short, abrupt, and downright tense. On a Wednesday afternoon in early May, Gabriella walked into Zach's office. "Honey, can you come to Sam's office at 5 o'clock in the evening for a couple of minutes? We want to talk to you." "Of course, Mrs. Ortiz. I will be there." Now he wondered if they were going to fire him. At 5 p.m., he entered Sam's office. As he walked in, Cassie walked out. She was dressed very nicely, too nicely for work. Apparently, she had either an event or a date. The very thought of it depressed him. "Hey, Zach," she said as she passed him at the door. He replied, "Hi, Cassie." Then he thought, less than a year. Definitely. He didn't think he could last a whole year. He will need to prepare his resume. Sam said, "Close the door, Zach." He closed, and as almost 4 years ago, they sat around the coffee table. Gabriella did not look as usual determined and uncompromising. Mostly, she looked sad. Sam began, "Zach, as your employer, I can't ask you to do what I'm about to say. As your friend, I hope you do this. You know that Gabi is on the board of a local charity that helps homeless women get back on their feet. She provides them with a place to stay, food and clothing, while they receive an education or learn some skill. The first group of women in this new program graduates this Saturday. That evening, the charity organizes a small event in their honor to celebrate their achievements. All the senior managers of our company and their spouses are invited, and Gabi also invited all of our children. She and I consider you part of this group and want you to come too. It's not black tie, but it would be preferable if you wore a suit or sports jacket and tie." Gabriella smiled and said, "Please wear your best suit." Sam rolled his eyes. She continued, "A couple of months ago, I was hoping that Cassandra would be your companion. To my disappointment, it didn't work out that way. Most single people will probably bring companions, but I've already stopped Cassandra from bringing anyone. I hope you don't bring anyone either, but based on our conversation a couple of months ago, I suspect you won't. What Sam and I ask you to do is talk to her on Saturday night after the event. I know this will be difficult for you, but please do this for me. I'm afraid we'll lose you if you don't." He tried to interrupt Mrs. Esor. She continued, "No, Zechariah, I know it's true. You don't look at me the same way you used to. Before you left for Germany, I always saw love and admiration in your eyes. Now all I see is sadness. This is killing me. Can you honestly say that you haven't thought about leaving the company?" There was a long pause before he answered, "No, I haven't started looking yet, but this thought has crossed my mind." Gabriella took out a handkerchief and dabbed her eyes. "I suspected it." She sighed heavily. "Remember when we sat here a little over 4 years ago and you showed us this beautiful ring you bought for Lisa?" He nodded. "What was my reaction?" He replied, "It was not what I expected." She said, "It wasn't because I wasn't happy that you found love, because I was happy for you. My reaction was because I thought, well, I hoped you'd take a little longer to fall in love with Cassandra. She is so special, and you are so special. I know that you would make a wonderful couple. I thought that time had already run out then, and now I am again afraid that time is running out. I don't think she's serious with that doctor, but I'm afraid the gap between you two continues to grow. So we ask you as a friend, as a member of our family, please talk to her. Please." "Mrs. Ortiz, what if she doesn't want to talk to me? And what if she rejects me because of what I did?" "Then you will do everything you can, but it won't work. At least you can look back on this time in your life and know that you did the right thing. Can you say that you have done the right thing in the last 3 months? Can you look me in the eye and tell me that you have been doing everything right for the last 3 months?" He felt ashamed as he whispered, "No." Sam said, "Zach, we still think what you did to Gerald was right. I suspect you had so much heat and anger at the time that it wasn't that difficult. Even now, almost 9 months later, I'm sure we could all sit down and look at your private investigator's file on the destruction he left behind and make the same decision. We don't know how your conversation with Cassie will end, and I can imagine that you're feeling unsure about that. But compare that solution to this one. If you can do this, then I know you can do this. I don't want to see you go work for someone else, Zach, but if you do, I'll understand." Zach said, "You might think I'm crazy for asking this question, but I feel like I have to ask it. You know your daughter. If I tell her everything, and I do mean everything, if she reacts badly, or should I say, if she thinks I did something wrong, do you think she will report it to the police? I would prefer that my accomplices not fall under this. Gabriella was about to answer when Sam made an unusual gesture, interrupting her by squeezing her hand. I can't say for sure, Zach, but I hope we raised her to see that you did what you thought was right, which we all thought was right. Even if she doesn't agree with it, she should respect it enough not to rat you out. I suspect that if she tells the police everything, they will still have a hard time proving anything with your strong alibi, lack of evidence, and a scene that cannot be investigated further. Ortiz said what they wanted to say. Now it was Zach's turn. Zach stood up to leave and said, "I'll do my best. This I can promise you. I have no idea how this will end." Sam stood up and shook Zach's hand. "I know what you will do. I believe in you. I believed for a long time." Gabriella stood up and hugged him tightly. "I love you, Zechariah. I will always love." He replied, "I love you too." He was so sad at that moment. It was as if he expected to lose part of his family, and perhaps he did. He spent the entire Friday evening discussing with Daniel and Gina. Although he tried to convince them that she was not like her mother and was unlikely to accept what he had done, they continued to tell him that he needed to do this so that he could move on. 6 months of suffering in Germany, then a week of hope, followed by another 3 months of pain. He couldn't go on like this anymore. He definitely agreed with this. Zach was incredibly nervous on Saturday. He arrived at the event a few minutes early. It was held in a hotel next to the shelter where the women lived. The grand ballroom was divided into smaller spaces, and there seemed to be 10 tables with 8 chairs each. When he arrived, Sam was already waiting for him. "Hey, Zach, glad you came." "Me too. Is everyone here already?" "No. So far we have a little more than half of the guests, but soon we expect a full room. We have assigned seats, so graduates are spread throughout the room. Otherwise, we were afraid that they would all gather at one table. Let me show you your desk." Sam led Zach into the ballroom to a table next to the performance podium. The only person at the table he recognized was Cassie. Zach's seat was 1 seat away from Cassie, and there was a high chair next to him, which he found odd. "Hi, Cassie." She was wearing a very beautiful dark blue dress. "Hi, Zach." While it wasn't exactly warm, it wasn't the cold, curt greeting like before. He didn't know anyone else at the table. A few minutes later, Gabriella brought a pretty young woman who looked to be in her early 20s and her little daughter, who he thought was 3 or 4 years old, to the table. The woman was wearing a beautiful knee-length black dress, and the little girl was also wearing a beautiful, new, colorful dress. Gabriella said, "Hello, everyone. I would like to introduce you to the star of this table for tonight. This is Melody. She just graduated with an associate's degree in accounting. And this beautiful little angel is her daughter, Bella. Isn't that an appropriate name? Zechariah, I entrust them to your care." Bella was the only child at the event. He was surprised by such a request, but tried to fulfill it. Her mother sat next to Cassie and Bella sat next to him. He introduced himself to both of them, as did everyone else at the table. Bella, sitting in her chair, was not shy. She told Zach all about her mom, about where they lived, about the new orphanage they were building nearby, about Mom's new job, about the new dresses they were wearing, and about the new things, and about the new used car, and so on and so forth. Zach really liked it. She was a funny little girl. She made almost the entire table laugh. Cassie said, "You're a real salesman, Melody." "Don't I know? I used to try to hold her back, but I realized it was better to let her exhaust herself." The others at the table laughed. For dinner, everyone had a choice of chicken parmesan, spinach cheese manicotti, or filet mignon. Soon the food and drinks arrived and Bella was ready to eat too. She was nibbling on her breadstick when they brought her the manicotti, which she really liked, until she saw Zach's filet. She tugged at her mother's sleeve and said, "Mom, can I have a piece of steak?" Her mom chose chicken and Cassie chose manicotti. Before Melody could respond, Zach suggested, "If it's no problem for you, I can give her some of mine. I do not mind." "Please, Mom, please." Melody's look at Zach said, "Sorry." she said. Just a couple of bites, Bella. He needs to eat too. Fine. Then, turning to her new friend, she said, without invitation, "Thank you, Mr. Zach." She was too charming. Zach happily cut off a decent chunk of meat and began cutting it into tiny, toddler-friendly pieces, like he'd seen his sister do for her kids many times. She was very good with her fork and had good manners for her age. While her mother may have been one of the stars of the evening, Bella was definitely the hit at the table. After dinner and before dessert, Gabriella came to the podium and asked the new graduates to join her. She gave a short speech highlighting the achievements of the 8 women who graduated that evening. Each was either homeless or abused less than 3 years ago. Every woman standing near the podium was recognized and applauded for their efforts. Almost all of them have already found work. There were several races among them, and with the exception of Melody, most of the women looked to be in their 30s, but a few looked older. One of them looked like Gabriella's age. After the ceremony, the dessert carts rolled out and Bella's eyes were the size of saucers. Melody let Bella choose her own dessert. When the coffee arrived, Bella asked, "Can I have a drink?" When the waiter listed Melody's drinks for the kids, Zach asked, "Can your chef make hot chocolate?" This caught Bella's attention. Her pleading eyes turned to her mother made everyone except Melody chuckle. Melody sighed, "1 hot chocolate, please." Zach added, "Make 2, please, and I have a favor to ask." He beckoned to the waiter and whispered a few instructions to him. The waiter nodded and returned to the kitchen. Zach told Bella, "Be patient because it takes time to do everything well. Does your mom ever braid your hair?" She nodded. He continued, "It takes time to make them look beautiful, right?" More nods. "It's the same with hot chocolate. It takes a few minutes, but it should be worth it." Meanwhile, she enjoyed her warm chocolate and peanut brownie topped with hot chocolate and whipped cream. While waiting for the hot chocolate, slow dance music started playing and Sam asked Gabriella to dance. Soon, several other senior managers were also dancing with their spouses. Zach wondered if this was mandatory. Zach leaned over to his new partner in crime and asked, "Bella, ask Mom if we can dance." Melody looked at Zach strangely, but allowed him to take Bella to the dance floor. He asked her to stand with her feet on his legs, and he held her hands as they circled around the hall. They had quite a large audience, including a smiling Gabriella, Sam, and those sitting at his table. A few minutes later, he whispered in her ear again, and she nodded in response. Zach picked Bella up and brought her back to the table. He told Melody, "She wants you to dance with us." Melody smiled at this man who was suddenly interested in her daughter. Zach saw his brother-in-law do this to his sister and their daughter once. He hoped that he would succeed too. Basically, with Bella on his left side holding Melody's right hand, he kept his right hand on Melody's waist and her left hand on his shoulder. They clearly weren't Fred and Ginger, but Bella seemed to be enjoying herself. Zach spent most of his time talking to the adorable Bella. Melody looked at Zach most of the time. They talked while they danced, and she learned that Melody would be working in the accounting department of McDye. She was very excited and nervous. Zach said, "Did you know Gabriella used to work in accounting there?" "I know. She and Mr. Ortiz interviewed together." This made Zach smile. "Yes, they are 2 of the most wonderful people I have ever known. I think you'll enjoy working there." He thought for a moment, thinking about how long he would work there. He also learned that Melody was looking for a daycare center for Bella that would be close to McDye. Zach was confident that Mindy's Montessori school could help with this. He might even be able to get a company or charity, or a combination of both, to come along with him to help. The school also offered scholarships for those who had difficulty paying. After a few minutes of dancing, they heard, "Can I intervene?" It was Cassie. Zach said to Bella, "I see our hot chocolate on the table." It worked, and she happily led her disappointed mother back to the table. After they danced together in silence for a minute, Cassie asked, "Are you trying to make me jealous?" "What? No. I, uh, I wouldn't do that. I just wanted to be kind to Bella so her mom could rest." I know, I'm kidding. You were very kind. I think you made too good an impression. After a few seconds of thought, he decided, I don't understand. Over the past 2 months, I haven't received a single hint that you might be jealous. She paused before answering, Well, I'm jealous. I love seeing this side of you. Zach was confused. For another moment, she continued, You hurt me, Zechariah. It was only one weekend, but I can't tell you how much I was looking forward to the next one. When you closed yourself off from me, I was depressed. If you don't believe me, you can ask my mom and dad. It took him a while to find the answer. I know, and I knew it while I was doing it. I am so sorry. I hated myself all this time, but I had a reason that I would like to tell you later after this event, if you allow me. All. The whole dirty truth, and then you'll have a reason not to talk to me. I am a grown girl, Zechariah. I think I can handle it. So he became Zechariah again. I desperately hope so. She squeezed the hand she was holding and led him back to the table where Bella was with a chocolate mustache and whipped cream. Gabriella watched them dance, enjoying the fact that her plan seemed to be working. Sam said, It was quite clever to put Bella and Melody next to Zach. Are you proud of yourself, Gabby? Oh, shut up. We haven't won the game yet, but it looks like the direction is changing in our direction. Sam kissed his cunning wife tenderly, knowing that she wasn't particularly fond of public displays of affection. She was in such a good mood that she didn't complain. Continuing the entertainment, Zach pretended to drink thick, sweet hot chocolate to get a mustache, causing Bella to giggle. As the evening drew to a close, Bella began to doze off, which was Melody's signal that it was time to leave. Thank you, Zach, for entertaining Bella tonight. I can see that she really liked it. It was my pleasure, Melody. You should bring her to the office from time to time. I would love to see her, and important people like Cassie and her parents would too. Can I help you carry it to the car? She hadn't noticed Cassie's jealousy until she joined in the dance, but she realized it now. Not wanting to irritate the CEO's daughter, she smartly but kindly refused. A few minutes later, Zach walked over and whispered to Cassie, Are you here with your parents? She nodded. Can I take you so we can stop somewhere and talk? She nodded again. Zach approached Ortiz and said, Cassie agreed for me to drive her. Since she came with you, I just wanted to notify you. Sam was quite reserved, but Gabriella, in true finishing school manners, looked pleased and nodded in agreement. After Zach left their table, Gabriella was beaming with happiness. Sam said, You are triumphant. Barely able to contain her glee, Gabriella responded coldly and hoarsely, I know. He asked, Do you realize that if everything goes according to your plan, he will probably stay at her place for the night? She said, I trust our daughter to do the right thing. If spending the night with him is the right thing to do, I have no problem with it. He laughed. You surprise me sometimes. She kissed him on the cheek and said, I need to keep you on your toes. In the car, Zach said, My current place is my parents' house, so it's either the restaurant, your place, or this car. It's up to you to choose. She said, I think I'd prefer my seat. They drove west from downtown, past Rice University and Galleria, toward the general area where almost all of the McDye employees lived. The conversation was fairly low-key, mostly about how great the event was and how amazing the charity was to help these women and those preparing to graduate next year. When he arrived at her house, he saw that she had a beautiful but small townhouse that looked relatively new. When he got out of the car, he took the detective folder that was lying on the back seat. As they walked in, she asked, Do you want something to drink? No, thanks. I need all my brain cells for this, although I reserve the right to kill most of them later. She poured herself a glass of wine, and they sat down in her living room. With a hand gesture, she said, Okay, the stage is yours. He asked, What do you know about my divorce from Lisa? Aha, this is not an interrogation. This is your story. He sighed heavily. Fine, it can take some time. He told her everything, from the night they first met to falling in love, he thought. He explained her strange behavior when he returned from trips, her reluctance to play the violin, and how Mindy's pregnancy sparked Lisa's interest in possibly starting a family. He then told her about the call from his brother, the photograph in the newspaper, and the detective's report. He said, "I brought the report on the bastard so you can see what kind of person he is. I can point to 2 lives he ruined, plus several others he hurt. He leaves a trail of suffering wherever he appears. I don't understand why he was so celebrated. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd like you to take a moment to look at this file." She looked him straight in the eye and said, "No, everything is fine. If you say this man is poison, I believe you." He thought poison was a curious word, but continued. "Fine. So, on that basis, here's what happened. Like I said, this man is poisonous. He has hurt countless people, pushed one woman over the edge, not to mention what he did to Lisa, on top of destroying her love of music, and was complicit in the destruction of my marriage. I wanted him to be punished for crimes for which he would never be convicted, and for which some even praised him. Call it what you want, revenge, retribution, justice, or whatever. So, with the help of a few other people, we came up with a plan to get justice for him and keep me out of jail. This didn't quite go according to our plan. Please never reveal the names of my accomplices. Your mother and father supposedly sent me on a trip abroad. My brother went on that trip instead of me because I was supposed to be the one to carry out the act, and his going through immigration gave me an alibi. He was allegedly working from home that day. I even quickly dropped by his office early in the morning to pick up some files so the security cameras would see him in the office. I caused a gas explosion at Gerald's house. My goal was to kill him, but he must be a strong old man because he survived, badly hurt, but alive. This means that even though I'm not technically a murderer, I tried to kill. My final comeuppance is that Lisa went to Austin with him to help him recover. Why? I don't know. But I know something she doesn't know. I have a tape of him saying things that would probably make her leave him, but I'm punishing her by letting her stay with that poor bastard. After that, I just wanted to leave because I couldn't stand the pity when I was so miserable. Your father allowed me to go to Germany, where I was miserable until the day you showed up. And then, when you left, I was unhappy again, but for a different reason. I wanted to go to Barcelona too, but being in Belfast, I realized that I need to have this conversation with you. If you were just a date or someone I couldn't have a serious relationship with, it wouldn't matter. But after our time in Vienna, I knew I could have a very serious relationship with you. I didn't want to waste your time on someone you'd probably reject because of what I did. I couldn't build our relationship on a foundation that would hide such a huge secret. He finished, so that's it, all of it. Watching him, she took a long sip of wine and then asked, "Is that all? Is there anything else you need to tell me?" "I just told you that I tried to kill someone. How can anything else compare to that?" "What about at school? You and the quarterback?" He narrowed his eyes on her for a moment and asked, "Who told you about this?" She replied, "For someone who knows my family so well, I'm surprised you haven't connected all the dots yet." Zach sighed and shook his head. "Obviously, you have an advantage over me, and I'm emotionally exhausted. Could you please enlighten this hopeless guy? You know my mother loves you, right? She really does. Do you know how long I've been hearing about you? She wanted you and me to be a couple for a long, long time, long before you met Lisa. There were times when I thought you were interesting and times when I didn't want to hear anything more about you. Zechariah, 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 that's all I heard. Then you got engaged to Lisa. My mother was crushed. Crushed. I went from constantly talking about you to complete silence. Then, after I started working at the company, I started seeing Mom and Dad more often, and you too. Shortly before you left for Germany, I could notice that something was bothering her. Do you remember the night I saw you after dinner with my parents? Then I found out about your divorce. She cried for you when she learned about Lisa's betrayal because she was hurt too. She missed you a lot while you were away and kept asking Daddy to bring you back. When I had to go to Vienna and Munich for work, She asked me to check on you. I did not care. I'd heard nothing but good things about you for years, so I knew you were a good guy. Almost everyone in the company loves you too. Some people think you're sucking up to my mother. The people who matter don't think so because you're not sucking up to my dad. We didn't communicate much after I joined the company, but you were always polite and friendly. Consequently, I was wondering who I would see when I came to Germany. Before we left, Mom and Dad sat down to talk to me to prepare me because I had only heard positive things for years, and now they were genuinely concerned about you. They told me everything they knew. I have to admit, I was a little surprised. Believe it or not, I was surprised not so much by them as by you. My parents are strong advocates for family, and their moral code is to always try to do the right thing. Maybe that's why you and her get along so well. After our first day together, it took a lot of willpower for me not to drag you into my room and spend the whole night with you. It would be the only way to make this day better. Of course, if I did that, we wouldn't see much of Vienna. By Saturday evening, when we were riding in the carriage under the blanket again, I wanted our hands to roam each other. These few days in Vienna were perfect, and I was already falling in love with you. I promise if we had gone to Barcelona, we wouldn't have seen the cathedral because I had only booked one room and didn't plan to leave it often. I hope this tells you what I was thinking. He shook his head. I can't believe you knew all this time and could still have feelings for me. She said, I knew, but it was your secret. Like you said, we couldn't start a relationship with such a huge secret, but you had to be the one to reveal it. I was angry and upset because I wanted more, but if you couldn't muster the strength to have this conversation, then we could never be anything. He replied, I'm sorry I hurt you, but I didn't know how to deal with it. Always trust me, and I will always trust you. This is how we will begin. He thought it was a great start. I like the sound of it. So where do we go from here? Well, don't make me jealous anymore by doing such cute things to someone's daughter. I said that I didn't know that I could make you jealous at that moment. No more appointments with doctors or anyone else for you. She walked over and sat next to him. I promise it wasn't a real date, but it served its purpose, which was to get back to you to hopefully push you into action. Also, if you and I are to become anything, then you need to be careful about how tightly my mother has you wrapped around her finger. He laughed. It may be difficult, but if it's any consolation, I spent a lot of time while you were in Europe wishing I could have been wrapped around you instead. Is it true? She leaned over and kissed him. It was a nice kiss on the lips. Is it true? Then he kissed her back, enthusiastically, and the feelings they'd had together in Europe weren't just renewed, they exploded. It was a good thing no one could see into her house because it took them about 20 seconds to end up naked on her couch. Although they both cared about each other, there wasn't much love there at the moment. After lunch, her phone rang. She saw from the call ID that it was Gabriella. She laughed and said, My mom is testing me. It's almost surprising she didn't call you. She answered the phone. Hi, Mom. How are you? Everything is fine, thank you. Have you and Zachariah managed to discuss everything? Yes. I think we decided to give it a try. She winked at Zach. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Can you two join us for dinner tomorrow night? I think I can find a way to convince him to come, but I need to call Zachariah first. She heard a disappointed "oh" through the phone. Cassie called out, Hey, Zachariah, can we have dinner with my parents tomorrow? After a short pause, Gabriella said, You feel very confident, don't you, Cassandra? Yes. I'm glad, very, very glad. Give my love to your new man. I'm going as often as he can. She definitely wasn't her mother. Zach knew it would be fun. About a month later, early one morning, Zach was in Austin at a rehab center, waiting for time for a quick visit. When he learned that Gerald would be in therapy, he took a large bag from the trunk of the car and entered the waiting room where Lisa was sitting. She looked much older than he remembered. She lost several kilograms. Her brown hair was not as well groomed as when they were married. First of all, she looked very, very tired, as if something or someone had sucked the life out of her. "Good morning, Lisa." "Zach, what are you doing here?" "Wait a minute. If you're here to gloat, don't worry. I know how I ended up here." "No, Lisa, I didn't come to gloat. I came to apologize and forgive you." "I don't think I deserve your forgiveness, but an apology. For what?" He said, "Not long after we last saw each other in hospital, I learned something. I could have shared this with you earlier, but I decided not to. A good friend convinced me to do the right thing and forgive you. We hope that what I am about to tell you will help you. Do you want to help me?" He replied, "Yes, I need you to listen to this recording. You'll understand when you're done." Zach played the recording of his conversation with Gerald for her. It didn't last long. Her reaction after that was not what he expected. She would be angry, either at Gerald for what he said or at him for not sharing it sooner. Her expression was simply sad. She asked, "Why bring this to me now? You could let me spend the rest of my life, or his life, taking care of him." "Because I met someone I deeply respect. She reminded me that it is always important to do the right thing, even when no one is looking. I know it. I don't care that I hurt Gerald. He deserved it, but because I love you, I shouldn't let him keep hurting you." She said, "I always suspected that you caused the gas explosion, but I wasn't going to try to prove it." This statement made it clear to Zach that her help to Gerald was more out of duty than out of love. I He then thought better than he was going to say, not wanting to focus on what he had done. He changed course. "I planned to wait 3 years before sharing this post with you. That's how long we've been married. I was given to understand that over the years you have already paid a very high price for your relationship with him. You've suffered enough. Do you remember hearing about the young girl who committed suicide after his devastating review of her performance? What if he had done this to you after our divorce? He doesn't care about anything or anyone. All he does is use people to make himself look better. He uses you to make himself look better because you are beautiful and people see you with him. Don't let him take advantage of you anymore. He doesn't deserve you, and you let him continue to hurt you when he doesn't care about you or your music. All that matters to him is himself. However, we, my family, our families, care about you and want you to get rid of him because he is hurting you. It would be terrible if he could turn you into someone like him." Lisa wondered how much of her life she spent on this sad man. How had she allowed herself to be deceived so easily and for so long? His sarcasm was not some kind of enlightenment. It was simply a sense of superiority that he felt and others supported. For some reason, many Texas newspapers allowed his family background, his teaching position, and his witty comments to help sell newspapers. Remembering the young girl who committed suicide, she realized that she was one of many who contributed to it. He enjoyed hurting others and putting them in their place like he did to her. She allowed it to happen and even encouraged it from time to time. She won't let this happen anymore. She looked at Zach, whom she loved so much. She still loved him, and a tear rolled down her cheek. She asked, "What's in the bag?" "This is from my entire family to you. I don't know why you left it, but I hope you love it again and think kind words about us when you use it." He took her violin case out of her bag, and she couldn't hold back any longer. Her parents paid a small fortune for the violin when it won first place in the Houston Youth Orchestra. They were so proud. She left it because she knew she would never play it next to Gerald. She burst into tears and hugged Zach as she cried for all the lost years, the lost music, and the lost marriage. He didn't resist or try to push her away. He hugged her and held her until she calmed down. He really hoped that she could get her life back on track, away from that bastard. After a few minutes, when she had calmed down, she said, "I have to go. I don't know where, but I'm leaving him. I'm sorry that I hurt you so much that you decided to do what you did to him, and let me stay with him knowing what you know. I will always regret that I hurt you. Thanks for coming, Zach. I will always love you." She took the case, walked out the door, and drove away. He loved her too. A week after Zach returned to Houston, Miriam visited Lisa and learned that she had left Gerald. In fact, she never saw him again, and he never got out of his wheelchair. The reason Miriam went to her was because she wanted Lisa to teach her children how to play the violin. Lisa initially refused, but was eventually persuaded by Miriam, her husband and children. She remembered how much Zach's family praised her playing early in their relationship and how much joy she could bring to others through playing or teaching. She regretted that she had not listened to them earlier. Her renewed love for music and teaching helped Lisa greatly. Seeing the smiles on the children's and Miriam's faces brought a smile to her face as well. She became friends with Miriam and her family, who helped her immediately after leaving Gerald. They even encouraged her to reconnect with Mindy and Robert. She apologized to Robert for involving Mindy in her affair. They accepted her apology and invited her to meet their daughter. It was a good meeting. She regretted that she had missed so much over the past year. She eventually returned to Houston and, with a little help, began the transition to teaching violin full-time. She also sought help from her therapist at the hospital to understand why she allowed Gerald to influence her so much. After regaining her playing skills, she even played occasionally with the Houston Symphony Orchestra and occasionally recruited a few of her colleagues from there to play for a new charity that had started operating in Houston called the WOW Foundation. Zach and Cassie got married, of course. At the reception, while dancing with Gabriella, Zach said, "Mrs. Ida Ortiz, I was born in the South and raised by strict Southerners, so I don't think I could ever call you Gabriella. However, if you allow it, it would be an honor for me to call you Mom." Hearing this, her eyes filled with pride and tears. She kissed him on the cheek and said, "I've been wanting to hear this from you for a long time." The newlyweds spent their honeymoon in Vienna, exploring even more of the city and attractions, feeling right at home. Over time, they had 3 children who were adored by both sets of grandparents. The new products they developed sold very well in the market. They were so successful that one of the megacorporations they competed with ended up purchasing a stake in McDye to sign an exclusive marketing and resale agreement. A large amount of the money from the sale was used to fund a charitable foundation that Gabriella founded, but which Cassie later took over. Sam said he would only agree to donate money to the fund if he could name it. He named it the Walking on Water Foundation because, like Zach, he really believed his wonderful wife could walk on water and thought it would be a good name for a charity. A few years later, after signing the agreement and receiving large amounts of money, Sam handed over management of the company to Zach. Over the years, he has earned this right and helped not only grow the MRI services business, but also manage the growth of many new products. Alas, they lost Sam in his 75th year. He had an aneurysm one night and didn't wake up, but Gabriella was there when he left, which would have been his wish. After Sam's death, Cassie began helping her mother with the foundation and eventually took over its day-to-day management. The foundation's primary goal was to help homeless and abused women in Houston. They built a new, larger building to help and house needy women and their children, trying to change their lives. The old building was converted into a Montessori school serving children from birth to 6th grade, allowing women to continue their education or vocational training. Mindy was hired to run the school. Like its predecessor charity, the foundation helped clothe and feed the women who passed through its doors as they worked to gain the skills needed to avoid returning to the streets or abusive relationships. They also helped them start a new life by helping them purchase a reliable used car, work clothes, and get into a new home or share it with another graduate. The model was so successful that it was adopted in several other cities. Now Cassie is being honored for her leadership of the WOW Foundation, which her parents founded. Lisa could always persuade several of her colleagues and students to come and play for a good cause. To compensate for the pain that Gerald had caused and that she and others had allowed, she felt the need to write inspirational articles for the Houston newspaper, praising and supporting the efforts of the city's musicians, and encouraged patrons to also provide positive reviews and support the development of youth programs for young musicians. She continues to receive nice letters from those who appreciate her kind words, including former conductors who have performed there. Mindy sang at a charity event for her friends and rarely turned down an invitation. Her eldest daughter was one of those who played the violin that evening. Bella played too. Her mother, Melody, eventually married Cassie's younger brother, Tom, and they were incredibly happy together. After speaking, applauding, and thanking many people for coming, Cassie finally walked over to where her husband and mom were talking. But of course, they always talked. She was sure that he loved her mother more than even her brothers, and that said a lot. She asked, "Mom, why is it that whenever I leave Zachariah for more than a few minutes, you are always there with him when I return?" She replied, "Because I thought I lost him once, and I would never let it happen again." Zach replied, "You'll never have to worry about that, Mom, because ever since she saved me from my isolation in Vienna, Cassandra has had my heart. No matter where I am, I will always come back to her and my family." Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.